It's a positive film. It has heroes and villains, and that it essentially is a fun movie to watch. It's been a long time since people have been able to go to the movies and see a sort of straightforward, wholesome, fun adventure.
Well, it's a fantasy. It's not science fiction so much as it is space fantasy. And it's about people. It's finally about people and not finally about science.
The story, when you actually put it into words, is only so much nonsense to hang a great visual experience onto. It's the stuff that fairy tales are made of.
Sort of boiling down religion into a very basic concept. The fact that there is some deity or some power or some force that sort of controls our destiny works for good and also works for evil.
Marvellous, healthy innocence. Great pace, wonderful to look at, full of guts, nothing unpleasant. I mean, people go bang bang and people fall over and are dead, but, no horrors. A sort of wonderful freshness about it, kind of like a wonderful fresh air.
It's got whatever you want it to be. It's pure entertainment. It's like a roller coaster ride, and it can be interpreted as long as you enjoy it, which is the intention.
Hello, welcome back to Generation Skywalker. This is the current Those Old Fossils episode. Joining me tonight, I've got Mark Daniels. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening.
I've got a feeling our topic tonight, you're probably someone I know is going to have quite strong views.
Yeah, but I'm going to try and keep them tempered. So not in a temper. I'm going to try and keep them tempered and keep a level head about it.
Yeah, I did have you pegged as that one for tonight. Also with us is Craig Spivey. Good evening, Craig.
Good evening, Stuart.
Now, Craig, I've got you pegged down as a nice calming influence on it.
I am a bringer of calm.
And to make up our round table tonight, we've brought on a guest who I think is going to maybe drop more into the Mark side than the Craig side here. Delighted for the first time to welcome Generation Skywalker, Lee Bullock. Good evening, Lee.
Good evening, Stuart. How are you? You okay?
I'm all good, mate. It's fantastic to have you on. And
thank you.
Yeah, quite an interesting, because we've got a main topic tonight, so quite an interesting to get your thoughts on it. Because I think you've probably got quite strong opinions of it.
I've got strong opinions on everything, mate.
let me tell you something, Stu. I feel like the tug bringing out the Titanic compared to Lee Bullock.
Lee, with regards to vintage collecting, I mean, it's been a tough old year. First of all, I hope you're all keeping well and your family and everyone.
Yeah, we're okay.
Good stuff. What? How has your collecting been during the last year? Is it still moving, or is it kind of ground to a halt?
To be honest, I go fairly slow anyway. I don't go hell for leather on my collection, sort of to that point. So I'm quite considered on what I get for the collection. I've been concentrating on quite a little bit of non-Star Wars stuff. So I've been doing Gen 1 Transformers here and there. And I've been concentrating a little bit on the Beyond the Toys stuff. So just getting some really odd bits, some kind of some strange pieces, So one of the items I picked up this year was the very first VHS format of Empire Strikes Back, and the sleeve, I picked up the promo sleeve for it. So it's an unused promo sleeve, and it's got the promotional not for resale printing on the back of the sleeve. And that was nice. That was a nice piece and kind of obscure. And I also picked up a season 5 Tops box that was unmade, that was still folded.
Nice pickups. And people who don't really know you, I mean, you like a dolly, don't you?
I do like a dolly. This is true. Or a large size action figure, as it says on the box. So yeah, I have been known.
So that's your main.
That is my main. Yeah, it is my main focus. That's the thing that is always a mainstay, and I dip in and out into other things, but that's one of the one of the cornerstones of my collection.
Lovely. Well, I'm sure we'll hear more about your collecting over the months and years. I'm sure we'll have you on plenty.
Master Yoda, I promise to return and finish what I've begun. You have my word.
I think we said back in the December edition of this show that we don't bring up generally what we've been buying, but I think it was Grant that made the comment that sometimes the story behind an item in your collection is more important than the item itself. So that's what we've decided to do each month. We're going to get 3 people to bring an item from their collection to the table and just give you a 30-second, 1-minute kind of story about how that piece made it to the collection, and those backstories, we'll share them with you. So, Mark, I'm going to come to you first. What have you bought?
I have bought my H.W. Stuart Limited of Thornley Bank, Glasgow, licensed box of Star Wars Mallow shapes. And this was a piece that I managed to get off eBay about 4 or 5 years ago now. And I was just about to go and pick my little boy up from school, little boy as was, and I just thought, I'll check eBay just before I go out through the door. So I went on to Star Wars newly listed items and scrolled down about 3 or 4 pages, and there it was. And it's one of these pieces, and I'll just explain to you briefly what this is. It's basically a display box for some Star Wars Mallow shapes, and they were orange flavoured, little triangles. One of C-3PO, one of Darth Vader, and one of R2-D2. And they came in this really elaborate, sort of beautifully illustrated box, display box. And it's one of these pieces, and a licensee that, you know, they only did one thing. They only did this particular food item, never did anything else. They were only available in the northern half of the UK. So it's a UK only item, and northern half at that. Like I say, this beautifully illustrated box. Even back then, the work that went into the illustrations is really quite accomplished. Whoever did this was very, very good at the job. Very good at the job. And it's really quite a striking piece. And it's a piece that I never thought I'd ever get because they're so rare. A lot of really long-term established collectors don't have this piece in their collection. It's very, very sought after. I managed to get it for 20 quid. And it's one of those things that I will never part with. I think I'll probably end up going to be buried with this because I love it that much. Yeah, it's a very, very rare item.
20 quid. How long ago did you say you got it?
It's about 4 or 5 years ago now.
Still a good price then for the time period.
20 quid was just an absolute gift.
Lovely item, mate. Lovely item. Worth being late for your child at the school gate.
Oh,
him standing there with no parent.
Yeah, well, it won't be the first time.
Lee,
yes.
What have you come up with?
I've come up with the Dennis Fisher large size action figure of Luke Skywalker. The reason I got this is for quite a long time I was trying to put together a full set of the Dennis Fisher large size action figures. So I'd done very well in the early 2000s with the large size stuff because at the time no one was really buying them, no one was really looking at them, and I was getting them for absolute steals. I mean, I was getting a lot of 12-inch figures for under £100 each. You know, I think I remember my C-3PO Dennis Fisher, which was close to shop stock, and that was like £35. So these were really, really good bargains, and I'd built all the way up to just needing Luke. Now, what was interesting about this is if you go back to 1995 when I was collecting them, Jim Stevenson, the old school dealer from the UK, that I'm sure most people remember, he had a Dennis Fisher Luke, and I had cold feet about it at £165. This is back in 1995. It was a lot of money to me then. And I had cold feet and I didn't end up getting it, and I regretted it. You know, it's like when you see an item and minor imperfections on the box and et cetera, they stick in your mind, and there's a good chance that if you were to see them again, you'd recognise them. Well, in 2010, a Dennis Fisher Luke came up on eBay. I recognised it, and I'm not 100% sure, but because memories can play tricks, but I am pretty sure that this was the one that I turned down, that I got cold feet on in 1995, and this I think turned up 15 years later. So it had done a round trip to me, a 15-year round trip to me. I ended up paying £225 for it. It's totally unused. It's been opened, but everything else inside is completely mint, unused. All the weapons are bagged. It was just a nice a nice ending to that journey, that Dennis Fisher journey that I'd gone on. And obviously from that, then I got the trade catalogue and I got the price list sheet, the Dennis Fisher price list sheet. And then to top this off, and this is partly and also in thanks to my friend Mark, I ended up with the salesman's tie for Dennis Fisher, which is one of, it's not something I usually go for, but it's like, this is something I've got to get. And that was just a really, really nice piece to get. So as far as I'm concerned, the Dennis Fisher ephemera, the trade catalogue, and the 12-inch Star Wars figures made by Dennis Fisher, they form a set for me. And so that's my that's my experience of this. So
lovely, mate. Lovely story. I can just imagine you with that tie around your head, around your forehead.
Like Rambo.
Yeah, that's how I'm picturing it. Yeah.
Yeah. I wouldn't be doing that.
Craig.
Yes, I'm going to bring to the table Ben Kenobi pencil case by Helix. I don't think I've ever told this story. This is the story of how I got into Helix and stationery, which was quite by accident, really. So I'm going back to the kind of late 1990s, and I lived and worked in Coventry, and a shop opened which sold stamps and coins and pop culture memorabilia. So I would go to this shop every payday, every month, and I would treat myself to a figure that I didn't have. And this became a regular occurrence. It was something I used to look forward to. I saw an opportunity because this guy had set up dealing, like I say, in kind of a broad range of collectibles. And I had my childhood collection of stamps, right? So growing up in the 70s, invariably you'd get an album for Christmas and Auntie would buy a stamp album. And I kind of half-heartedly would, collect stamps. And it would come and go in waves. But I had what I thought was quite a significant international and British collection of stamps. So I saw this opportunity to go in there and basically sell him my stamp collection so I could spend it straight away on Star Wars collectibles. So I fished out this album. I have a couple of albums, strutted into this shop thinking I'm going to be minted here. I'm going to be able to walk out with something really tasty. And he flicked through this album, in silence, as these dealers often do. And he sort of looked at me and he went, "Yeah, it's probably looking at about 20 quid." I thought I was in for hundreds. And he said, let's if you want it in the shop now, let's call it 20, 25 quid. And the only thing that was in the shop that I could afford was an old pencil case with Ben Kenobi on it, a tiny little H.C. Ford pencil topper of the Emperor's Royal Guard. So that's what I walked out with. And little did I know at that moment what that would open in terms of my collecting journey. I fell in love with it. I fell in love with that crazy, wonky little illustration of Ben Kenobi. It sparked memories of sort of kids having them at school, and yeah, that was the start of something big for me.
Love it.
Good story, that, Craig.
Yeah,
that's great. That is great.
He went back past the shop a week later, and these stamps are in the window for 800 quid.
I still think you had the better of the deal there.
Well, who knew? Who knew that, where that would all lead to?
Yeah, first steps. Yeah, great story, mate. Great story. And obviously, you and Mark went on to do your great big Helix project with Helix.
Indeed.
And people should check that enhanced version out, in particular of your story of that. Well worth checking out.
Sometimes I just don't understand human behaviour.
Now, Craig, before we get on to our main topic this month, you messaged me that you had got yourself you've got a stairwell display cabinet.
Yeah,
yeah. I'll let you run with what you've been up to over the Christmas period.
Yeah, it was just a little rabbit hole that I found myself down, and I thought I'd drag you lot down with me. So I'm not going to dwell too much about the cabinet in and of itself. It's part of my collecting area, which I had to improvise and be creative with, which sort of runs up the stairs and above the stairwell in the height of an apartment that doesn't have a loft. So it's a very high ceiling, but it was dead space. So I built into it. But part of what I did was I created this action figure cabinet, which sits kind of over the stairs as you walk up, and as you dogleg around, you see this thing. But it's been finished, it's been painted. I vinyled it probably a couple of years ago, and it's taken me ages and ages to fill it. And that's partly because I've been cross-referencing my collection with the information that's out there these days, which is nothing like it was when I was first putting this run together. So, that was partly to check for repros, which is what we're going to be talking about tonight, but also partly just to see what variants I had, because that knowledge was there and I needed to know how to scratch the itch. So it's taken a long time, but the weekend just gone, I finally got through that, double checking all that stuff and logging it, and it was time to put these figures up. Now, who on the call tonight has got a loose run?
Yeah, I have a loose run.
Stuart, I know you've had one in the past.
I've had several in the past, yeah. It's about half full again. It's getting there.
Mark?
No, I got rid of mine.
We've all had one at some point, and I imagine when you've had it out on display, you've put it in what is the collecting convention of release order. So starting with the first 12 and then running up to the last 17 or 15 UK collectors, which is it's what we all accept. People make those cabinets, don't they, with the little gaps, and you fill them in and they've got little coloured squares behind them, and that's kind of how it's done. But casual observer looking at that makes no sense whatsoever, because these figures were released out of order, and I think Luke Stormtrooper is the sort of shining example of that. But what I wanted to do to book that trend is to put them into movie order release, so order of appearance, if you like. And it threw up some interesting things, and some of the decisions, some of the places I put these things, I think are open to interpretation. But I wanted to just go through it with you, see if you agreed, see if you'd have put these things where I've put them, but also highlight a couple of unusual things that I've never noticed before until I went through this exercise. So are you up for that?
Mm-hmm.
Good.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so I'm not going to make this into a super long quiz, but starting off, first character who appears on the screen, C-3PO, closely followed by R2-D2. We see stormtroopers blasting through the door in the Tantive and the boarding scene, and Vader follows. So that all happens. So the next character to appear after Vader is Leia. We cut to Leia, and we have the scene with her and R2 and her evading capture. But then there's another character that comes in. Any guesses out of the whole of the 96 who I might have put in this place? Feel free to grab some reference, grab a card back if there's one.
Imperial Commander.
Yes.
Yeah, I would have said that, yeah.
Absolutely. So they're in the boarding party, and they are there now. Off the card, he is a generic commander. On the card in his Empire card, is it General Viers? He belongs somewhere else, but in a loose run, that's where he goes. So from that scene, we are with the droids on Tatooine, and we've got a Jawa, and we encounter 3 more figures very early on that didn't come in that first 12.
Power droid.
Power droid's 1.
Death Star droid.
Yeah.
There's another.
R5D4.
And R5 is the third. So while he's down as the Death Star droids, the card back and the fact that he's silver makes that character the droid that's in the Sandcrawler. You see him first, then you see Power Droid, then you've got R5, all in quick succession. Moving on, we meet Luke, we encounter some Sand People, we encounter Ben Kenobi, and then we cut back to the Death Star.
Yeah.
And we've got who?
Death Squad Commander.
Death Squad Commander, yeah. So that's where he goes. Then we're at the Cantina. Now, to do this, I obviously got Disney Plus up on the laptop, and I was freeze framing and scrolling through. So in order of appearance in the Cantina, there's a long shot where you've got Walrus Man in the foreground.
Snaggletooth.
Chewie.
Oh!
Chewie's there at the bar. Then you've got sort of a close-up of Snaggletooth. I think he turns around as Luke's walking in. And then as it's cutting around the cantina, you've got Hammerhead. And you get through all those characters before you get to Han. And then, of course, you've got Greedo.
Yeah.
So you've got all the way through the movie. Then the most obvious shift about comes because you've got Luke from the last 17 comes right up the front in his Stormtrooper gear, closely followed by him in his X-Wing pilot gear. Then another character from Empire.
Oh, the TIE Fighter pilot.
TIE Fighter pilot. So they're in the space battle. And then towards the end of the movie, the last figure of all 96 that appears in A New Hope.
Imperial Gunner.
Yeah. Interesting stuff, I thought, to get to that point. Rattling through Hoth, we see Luke first, we see Han, he comes inside, we've got some rebel soldiers, and then Han takes off his snow trousers, because the next time we see him, he's walking to the command centre and he's got his Bespin gear on. Bespin, Han is right up at the front, then we see Leia, and then we see our first mustachioed rebel commander. Now the next one I think is really interesting, right? So I've got, who do you think?
FX7.
Not FX7.
21B?
No, very close.
B12.
It's at this point in the movie that R2 starts scanning for Luke.
Ooh, yeah.
So pop-up sensor scope R2 appears here. But if you look at the figure and you look at the moulding of the sensor scope itself, technically he should go further down in the Dagobah scene. You only ever see that. You don't see the figure with it sticking up. You only ever see it some frogman.
The design of the sensor scope in itself is actually the Dagobah one.
Yeah, but the card back shows the one that's like a little radar dish. I'm not alone in finding this stuff interesting. Yeah, I've been living with this stuff for years and years, and you go through an exercise like this and it just throws up different.
This is an education, Craig.
One thing I've noticed though, Craig, is that you've kind of not done this with the special editions, because shouldn't Jabba the Hutt be in there?
Do you know, my cabinet's not big enough.
And Boba Fett.
And Boba Fett, yeah.
Fett, yeah. This is a despecialized edition. So the two medical droids are next, and then the attack starts, and we've got the ATAT commander. He's center frame, and you've got the ATAT drivers kind of to the side, and he's a little bit out of focus. So strictly speaking, the commander comes first, and all the Hoth troopers. And then we get to Dagobah, and we've got Yoda, and then we've got Luke Bespin. I had to double check this because I wondered whether belt was different, whether he attached the belt later down the line, but he's wearing the Bespin gear on Dagobah. So that's two Bespin figures that we've had so far, and we haven't even got to Cloud City.
So technically, it's Luke Skywalker Dagobah fatigues.
Strictly speaking, yeah.
Strictly speaking, yeah. And it's also interesting as well that the Leia Hoth, as we see it as Leia Hoth, well, all she does is take off a body warmer. That's part of her attire on Bespin.
Okay, then we're into the bounty hunters. There is a certain order that these appear. So you see Bosk's feet first, don't you? And then it pans up.
Yeah.
The scene jumps around. But I couldn't bring myself to put them in that order. So I put them in the order that you always see them. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's fair enough.
Yeah.
I don't know, Craig. If you've been really, really strict with the rest of the line, and then you've changed it in the middle, I think that's a bit dirty.
Do you? I might wake up in the middle of the night with that thought in my mind.
If I wake up in the middle of the night, I might text you about it.
Yeah, do that. I'll check it in the morning.
He really will as well.
Yeah, it just didn't feel right. Put them in that crazy sort of the way they blocked that scene is just runs counter to my instincts. So on from the bounty hunters, we get to Bespin. So the first character that we encounter in Bespin,
Car pilot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the scene on the gantry, we've got Lando, then Lobot, then a couple of the guards, and we're on Bespin for a while before Leia appears. Now after Leia Bespin, I've put another character. Who do you think I put after Leia Bespin? No.
3PO removable limbs.
Yes. So I've displayed him in bits.
Yeah, 3PO removable limbs and then Yugnaut.
That's right. And then that brings us to the end of Empire. So moving on to Jedi, there's a clear sequence. I think most people would get this. So you encounter the Gamorrean Guard first, then you've got Bib Fortuna, and then again looking at this stuff again with this exercise in mind, you start to notice things that probably not noticed before. So next up is Yakface. So Yakface is there in the background as the droids come in. You've got Rees in there, a man. He's to the side of Han when he's on the wall, and the camera goes to the Han in carbonite, and a man turns around and looks at it. Then you're into the two droids, 88 and EV99. You've got Squidhead comes in next. Then you get into the main characters. So which of the main characters comes in at this point?
Boosh.
Yeah.
Boosh, yeah. Then Lando Skiff.
Yep.
Then Han Solo Carbonite.
Yep.
Then Luke Jedi.
There's a little bit where you see Klaatu before Luke comes in. After Luke, it's easy.
Is it?
Brain freeze.
What happens to Luke after he comes in and tries to strike a deal?
Well, he goes to the Great Pit of Carcoon.
I'll put you out of your misery. It's the Rancor Keeper.
EV99.
It's the Rancor Keeper. So then we're outside and we're off to the Great Pit of Carcoon. So we've got our guys on the skiff.
What about EV99?
I've said him.
Yeah.
Yes, that's been said.
For Squidhead.
Sitting right next to 88.
I am listening.
So our three skiff guards.
Barada.
Weekway.
Yeah.
Klaatu skiff guard.
Well, isn't that an interesting point? The third skiff guard is Nikto. Then we get to another character.
R2 pop up.
R2 pop-up. Then we get to Klaatu, who is not a skiff guard at all. He's a sail barge guy, unless you sort of argue that he's protecting and he's guarding the skiff by being on the sail barge. He's not actually a skiff guard. He runs onto the deck of the sail barge. So then we cut to Death Star. Got 3 Imperials.
Biker Scout.
No.
Yeah, you see the Biker Scout in the lineup, don't you? When they come off the Imperial shuttle.
Emperor, Imperial Dig.
Yeah.
And
I might
Emperor's Royal
revisit
Guard,
that
yeah.
Biker Scout. I think you're right, Mark.
So yeah, Biker Scout would come into that.
You're right.
So that landing scene's a bit of a sticky one, because so many characters in the background that you could argue, well, any of the Imperial troops could fit into there.
ATST driver.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
You need to go back and freeze frame that, I think.
Do. Because you don't actually see the Imperial dignitary. You can sort of see people moving behind.
Dignitary comes later in the throne room scene.
But they are there. You can see them. So you see what I mean? It's some of it's open to interpretation. So moving on
We're going to let it slide, Craig, this time.
No. It's a work in progress. It's why I'm bringing my friends into the discussion. Moving on from the Imperials to the Rebels. So we've got the briefing scene. Yeah. So there's an establishing shot of the briefing room. And at the back...
A-wing pilot.
Yeah, you've got the pilots.
B-wing pilot.
You've got the A and the B-wing pilots are stood at the back in their green and blue, holding their helmets. You can see Rebel Commandos are in there with their helmets. Then you've got like a little gang of prune faces. And then Akbar makes a bit of an entrance. And you've got Maydeen. And then you've got Lando, General. And then you see Nien Nunb in the background when Han and Lando are talking about the Falcon and not getting it scratched. You sort of see him wander past in his little natty waistcoat.
It's the worst costume out of all the I mean, red and blue. I mean, it's shocking.
I think he looks pretty snazzy, to be honest.
Right, okay, mate. Next time we see you, I want to see you in a red overalls and a blue waistcoat.
I'd do it.
You would as well.
I would do it.
Tucking your trousers into your boots is always a strong look.
It is.
Right. So we're now into the last row, or the top row of my cabinet. So we're into Endor, and it all unravels a little bit. So...
Oh, Ewoks. This is gonna suck. This is gonna suck.
So we've got Han and Luke and Leia, who all walk across the screen like a Scooby-Doo scene.
Yeah.
In a row. I'm going to revisit. I've got my Biker Scout there. I might revisit him now on the back of this conversation. So obviously the first Ewok we encounter is easy.
Wicket.
And then the next two they're kind of clear.
Tebow and Logray.
Tebow and Paplu.
Paplu is the one who jumps on the speeder bike.
He was, but I'm pretty sure he's one of the ones that when they're in the net and they're in the hunting party, I think he's one of the hero costumes that's kind of waggling his spear. Willing to be corrected on that, but that's kind of because the feathers are in the same arrangement. Then Logray sort of shakes them down a bit when they get to the village.
Chief Chirper.
Yeah, and then the next three, anybody's guess.
Where are we putting Lumat, Romba and Warwick?
I've just guessed. I've put them pretty much in that order, Lee, because it becomes a very dark, mushy mess of sort of grey and brown Ewoks looking angry.
You do realise that people are going to be messaging in to this, and they're going to be actually telling you the exact order.
I really hope so.
The exact order.
So then the last one out of that lot, if we're going to move the Scout Trooper back to the parade scene, should be easy.
Anakin.
Yeah. So there you go. That's the original 96 vintage figures in order of appearance.
How does it look? Because the sculpts, obviously, from 1978 to 1985 changed. And the level of sculpting changed and the technology changed. How does it look with them all mixed and matched, where you've got like a small head Han in the same vicinity as an Imperial gunner, which is, completely different technology. You can tell that the way they sculpted that was different than the way they sculpted, let's say, for instance, small head Han.
It's a really good question, Lee. So, I mean, you've got things like the cloth cape jar in there, mixed in with the vinyl capes, which doesn't jar. We're sort of used to seeing that. The Imperial Commander doesn't look out of place at all. You look at little small head Han and little small head Luke Stormtrooper. I don't think they vastly apart in terms of style. A TIE pilot next to an X-Wing pilot doesn't jar with me. I think it's a nice way of displaying them. I think mixing up the droids, particularly with the first 12, where you've got the Death Star droid and Power droid in there with the Jawas and Luke, I think that feels right. Having all the Hoth characters together looks right.
One of the most interesting ways I've heard loose figures displayed, because I think a majority of people go just on first 12, then the 20, 21, you group them together as, you know, Hoff, Bespin, so on and so forth, and Imperials together and what have you. So what you've described, actually, it's the first time I've ever heard anybody display the figures like that, and I think it's fantastic.
I'll share some pictures on the enhanced version.
What I said about the sculpts, thinking about it, is maybe a bit of a moot point, because if you look at some of the sculpts that were done of the last 17 or last 15, as I prefer them, there were different sculptors for each of the for quite a few of the figures anyway. So if you were, I think, didn't Bill Lemon do ones like Yak Face out of acetate, and then you had other sculptors that would come in and do them in a completely different medium, which in itself is going to affect how the sculpt looks. So my question about, do the sculpts actually line up? You know, like for instance, you're putting an 85 figure with a 78 figure. Perhaps that doesn't really matter at all anyway on that basis.
I've got an interesting fact about sculpts on figures. A friend of mine, his brother used to work at Royal Dalton, as was in Burslem, Stoke-on-Trent. And one of the sculptors that came to work for Dalton's some years ago now was actually the sculptor of a Man-O-Man and a B-Wing pilot. If you look at the figures next to one another, you can actually totally see they were done by the same guy.
Amazing.
Small world.
It's strange that in Stoke-on-Trent, obviously because of the pottery industry, we do get freelance sculptors. There's a good chance that you are going to pull people like that to the area because of it.
Another interesting fact is an advertising agency that I used to work for once commissioned an artist by the name of Frank Langford, who is responsible for the Emperor's, you know, the adverts for Palatoy, for the Mail Away Emperor.
Oh yeah,
Chewbacca and a couple of others. He did a load of work for Palatoy. He did work for the advertising agency that I used to work for, and I uncovered this file with his artwork in. At the time, I didn't realise who it was. Well, I wish I'd bloody kept it now.
Yeah, cool.
I do think that's a really fascinating way of lining them up. It'd be great to hear other ways of how people have got their loose run. If there's any other ingenious suggestions out there.
Colours would be cool, wouldn't it?
Colours.
People do the bookcases.
We could have this every month, Craig. You could change your run.
Yeah, because I've got nothing better to do.
You do them tall to short next month. Okay.
Well, it would be interesting to pass this on to the listeners and see if we can get some examples of different ways that people have arranged their loose runs.
Definitely.
This is madness.
Let's move on to our main topic for the month, and something it comes around so often, seems to have certainly reared its head again in recent times. That is the topic of reproduction. So first of all, before we get into any of the things that we've got noted down tonight to discuss, I just want to know from the outset, from the start, what is your stance on reproduction? I'll come to you first, Lee, being the guest.
My stance on reproduction is that I am completely against it. I think it's damaging to the hobby. I think it's damaging to both established collectors, and it's damaging especially to new collectors. I think it's a false economy. I don't see anything really altruistic about the production of these. I think whilst it's very difficult to stop, and maybe there is dialogue there for harm reduction, I do wish they were never produced. It makes your life as a collector quite difficult.
Fair point. Craig?
Yeah, I mean, I'd echo that. I mean, I don't have any reproduction items in my collection personally, and it isn't something I would ever recommend or advocate to anybody.
Okay, and Mark?
We're going to have a very hard time tonight having a even discussion about this, because I agree with everything that's been said so far. I am against it. I'm going to try and approach the subject with a degree of keeping my vision a bit wider. But as far as I'm concerned, it's not something that I support. It's not something that I agree with, and I would actively speak out against it. So yeah, we're gonna have a right old time tonight.
Yeah, because I'm very much in that camp as well. However, I would like us to discuss certain areas of it that maybe we can give a little bit of slack to. Now, with us all being anti-repro, it is going to be difficult, but we will try to give this a balanced argument. Now, I'm pretty sure that many people saw the video that Michael French of Retroblasting put out what I find in the community at the moment is you've got these anti-repro people who are very harshly anti-repro. Any repro is bad, and people run these groups. You're going to be bad. You're going to be bad. Then you've got someone like Michael French, who is completely the other way, who restores ships. He will take off stickers off ships and put reproduction stickers in their place. So there's no middle ground between these two groups. Now, I believe we've all watched that video, because the video was pretty damning towards people who are anti-repro, and they're so far apart, these two groups, that I wonder tonight whether we could go through a few points that are made in the video and a few points that are often made in these groups' rules about reproduction items, and try to find a bit of middle ground. Now, in that video, there was two things which I thought was ridiculous. First of all, someone, I don't know who, I mean, Retroblasting had created pseudo-names for the people they were talking about from these groups. I'm sure everybody who knows these groups could probably work them out, but someone had compared reproduction toy items to World War One, I think it was, which is the most absurd thing I've heard. And also, there has been death threats made towards people who support reproduction items, which I just think that's absolutely ludicrous from thing, and I'm sure we all agree on that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. At the end of the day, these are toys, and it's not a matter of life or death. And even more so in these times that we're going through at the moment. Let's get into the body of it. Lee, I'm going to come to you first. I think you kind of touched on it when you was just saying why you don't like reproduction items. Yeah. But can you just take us through what you believe and what you think the community who are against reproduction believe is the real issue when it comes to reproduction items?
I think the issue that comes from my perspective on reproduction items is reproductions now are getting so good. They're getting so accurate that they can and will be passed off along the line as originals, and they will defraud people. Now, one of the things that our friend at Retroblasting said is that people who are against reproduction have some vested interest, some vested financial interest to protect their investment. And he created the straw man argument that we are somehow just protecting our own investment and this is it, and somehow that the repro community are completely altruistic and they're doing this for the love of the hobby. Well, let's be fair here. Let's be fair. There are people who are anti-repro who are doing it for their own best interest, their own business interests. That is true. Of course they are, right? And on the other side of this, people who make reproductions are not doing this for the love of it. They're doing this to make money. And that's not in itself a bad thing. These people have got to make a living. But what they're doing is the easiest options to flood the market with reproduction items that have been engineered to closely mimic originals. So this isn't a case of that you have an Imperial Gunner blaster that looks the part, that looks really good from 2 feet away. This is one where it takes a skilled eye, a trained eye, to even tell that this is fake. And I've seen some incredible ones where I'm like, whoa, these are the new floating blasters. That's really good. That's really scarily good. And how easy would that be to drop them in? A new collector comes along who wants to collect the original stuff. And then suddenly they get landed on eBay with a bunch of reproduction weapons and it kills it dead for them. They feel the guilt over the fact, well, I've just wasted all this money. I don't have the knowledge to get into this. I haven't got the energy to learn the knowledge, which, you know, as a new collector, you do have that inertia, and bang, they're out the hobby. And that for me is the killer of this. You know, if people want to make cheap alternatives where you're a casual collector and you're happy with just something visual, then keep them made of resin. Don't go making them out of polyethylene, which float. That is my view on the reproduction weapons side. That doesn't even come into what's happening with the figures. I'm just happy that certain individuals are being sensible and marking the copyright markings as they are, not like as they were on the original figures. I actually will applaud that. I will give credit where it's due. And I think the sensible and responsible option of people who are anti-repro is to promote that, is to encourage damn actions. Because one of the things we don't want is this ending up into some escalated war that then damages everybody. Should there, you know, if they want The argument from the reproduction people is that there is room for both sides. Well, if that's the case, make sure there is.
Mark, Craig, is there any other things, issues that you come up with that Lee hasn't mentioned?
Well, just to back him up on the point about new collectors, I had a friend contact me over Christmas. He's a guy I've known for years. He's not in the hobby at all. He's not a Star Wars collector. And he contacted me on behalf of his 11-year-old son, who is getting into vintage Star Wars collecting, which is a story in itself. And we're going to get young Seth on, and we're going to chat to him a bit more about that. But his specific question to me was about how to avoid repros and how he can educate himself. And I thought was really interesting is that he didn't contact me and say, Craig, can you let me know who's making the best repros? Because I've got my son and he's starting to get into this and he's collecting on a budget. This lad wanted to know. He wanted to know that he was going to be spending his money that he'd saved on the real deal.
Are there any arguments against those points? From the offset here, is there any issues here with us that are saying, well, actually, this isn't bad as what we're making out?
To me, it boils down to one thing, and that is money. There is the argument that new collectors or even old collectors who have been at this hobby for a long time or just come into it and are looking at the prices of little tiny black guns fetching over £100. You have to question the sanity of it, because it's very, very hard for somebody coming into this or somebody looking from the outside in and thinking, how on earth is a mass-produced tiny piece of plastic suddenly worth that amount of money? And we're talking over the past sort of several years, really, where prices for things have really skyrocketed to the degree that, like I say, the Sabre for a pop-up R2 it's over £250 now, isn't it? It's an obscene amount of money. And you have to say, this is where the repro guys have got their claws into the argument, and this is where they are coming in at. They are providing a service to those who don't want to spend that kind of money on essentially a tiny, tiny piece of plastic. Whether it's original or not, they are providing you with the tools to put together a display that maybe you will be happy with and sit it on a shelf and think, yes, that's absolutely fine. I've not spent a ridiculous amount of money on these figures, and I'm very happy, and my wallet is all the better for it. So I understand that argument. But what you have to say is what Lee and Craig have said. It is very, very damaging to the hobby when the reproductions now are so close to the originals. These guys have really upped their game in the past sort of 3 or 4 years, I'd say. And we are now seeing figures even, that are absolute, and I've seen the yak faces, some of the last 15. And we all remember those sort of one-piece molds that were really badly painted that were selling on eBay or trying to sell on eBay for sort of £30 or £40. They were dreadful. This next generation of reproduction figures, I'm not even talking about the weapons now, they are really quite good. It's damaging. There's no other word for it. So, yeah, there is an argument. I understand where they're coming from, but as a collector of vintage and as a person who has a lot of passion for collecting and the wider community, I don't really see any good in it at all.
I think from my perspective, what I would say to the people who make these repros is the horse is bolted. The repros exist, the molds exist, everything, these things exist. But will you at least show some responsibility if you are allowing there to be a broad church of collectors here, the ones who are the more casual and the ones who are the hardcore? If you're allowing that, don't damage other people's collections. Have some responsibility and mark your stuff. Now, I'm happy that the individual who is behind the yak faces has marked them with SLC. I'm happy with that. Okay, that's great. We should encourage that. As responsible collectors, we should encourage that. We shouldn't get this to the point where we push him against the wall and he just goes for broke and just sets the world on fire with this. I think we need to encourage them to be more responsible with these things. Okay, to mark them up. Now, my biggest problem isn't so much the figures, but the weapons. it's the weapons. And this has been driven by the rise in prices. So maybe we also have to take some responsibility for this too. But the weapons that have been engineered to look so unbelievably close to the originals, that's where my main problem stands.
Okay, so a nice starting point there. So, right. Before we move on too much, now, Craig, you've been around the collecting scene for a long period now. In fact, I think all three of you have been. I think you can all go back to the 90s to find you boys collecting.
Yeah.
So, but Craig, is it true that the stance against reproduction items, I mean, reproduction items have always been around, okay? Since the 90s, they have existed. But is it true that it's more of a recent campaign that it's so pushed now that it's reproduction items are bad? In the 90s, weren't they conceived as just another option for the collector?
I remember coming across a flyer, and this would have been early 90s, I think. So it was a black and white flyer. It was advertising replacement weapons. Okay, and I have some recollection that there was a connection with Nottingham, so it might have been a Nottingham mail away address or something, but that sort of rings a bell. And this was at a point where I'd brought all my original figures down from the loft at my parents, and I was missing some guns, and this seemed like a really good solution. You know, there was this flyer advertising these weapons. I admit the appeal was partly the price. I mean, they were like £1 each or whatever. I can't remember, but they were very affordable. But also that option of completing everything in one go. I could go, I'll have 2 of them, 1 of those. And I remember filling this thing in, and I think at the time I didn't even consider the question of them being reproductions or whether they'd just been, leftovers from the factories or any of that. But they arrived and they were terrible. I mean, they were just absolute piles of poop. They'd clearly been, done cottage industry style, a lot of flashing around the edges, and they were some of the smaller ones were barely recognizable as guns. I chalked that up as a lesson learned. I mean, I replaced them over time. I don't really remember ever maybe trying to tidy them up and using them on displays, but even back then, they just didn't sit with me. They weren't legit. They weren't part of what I was into. And I think what's happened in those intervening years is that knowledge just across the board has been filled in and has been documented. And even things back then, a blaster was a blaster was a blaster. The idea of having these different shades of blue and black and all that kind of stuff was still some years away. So I think all of that has grown together. So our knowledge of how these things were all intended originally, what went with what figure, and then this idea of these repros getting more and more sophisticated. That's where it's sort of, as the guys have said, that's where it's sort of coming unstuck, and that's why we're all getting a little bit antsy about it, because they were very noticeable.
Yeah, you make a very good point, actually, that education and research and stuff, and it's definitely more in the forefront of people. Mark, Lee, do you remember anything different in the 90s?
I remember the guns being made from lead, like lead soldiers, because that was the thing that was easily achievable. It's strange, really, because back in the late 80s, early 90s, you could still pick the weapons up. There was loads out there. We're not talking about stupid amounts of money for stuff. You were picking collections up at car boot sales and whatever. You were still collecting, you were still seeing figures, carded figures, in shops. At that point, they were still readily available. The stuff was out there. Nobody was buying it. There was a very small group of people that were collecting it. It isn't like it is now, where we've got a huge following for this stuff, and prices are through the roof. It was never like that. So it always sort of left me puzzled that anybody would want to go to the trouble of making a really poor reproduction. And I remember seeing it and having it in hand, like a white metal sort of lead Dengar rifle. I was thinking, well, what's the point of that? I mean, the effort involved in producing a really naff version of a Dengar rifle and then selling it for less than what you could get an original is more or less the same sort of money. It's crazy. I've never really understood the motivation behind reproduction at that time. Now it's a different kettle of fish. There's big money to be made from decent weapons. So back then it was a bit of a head scratcher.
My memories of reproduction weapons was they were of such poor quality back then that they almost felt like they were made in someone's garage. And it was more of a cottage industry than the kind of industrial scale that we see now that's been farmed out into Far East vendors. I didn't like them. I wasn't into them. Again, as Mark says, weapons and figures were out there. You have to remember Kenner and their affiliates produced more than 200 million action figures in their time. When we really talk about this, loose figures and their weapons, in reality, are not that rare. They're really not. Last 15, last 17, they're not rare. They're in demand. And part of the problem is as well, is that people want them now. People want them yesterday. They want to put a loose run together in 3 months. So they're going to pay through the nose and they'll drive those prices up. We've all seen them with the last 15 figures. Now, with a bit of patience and a bit of work and a bit of tenacity, you can put together a loose run with original weapons and you can put it together in a reasonable amount of time and for a reasonable amount of money. Or you can take all this money you've got and dump it into reproduction. And it's a false economy to me. I think if you want to spend the time rather than the money, then you go along the original route, which is what my view was back then. I've seen these reproductions and they were very poor, very poor. As Mark said, some of them were made of lead, they were made of resin, so they were full of air bubbles. I remember having a Stormtrooper blaster for the 12-inch Stormtrooper, and it was made of black resin, and you actually could see air bubbles in the plastic. I actually broke the thing in half, and it was like an Aero. The thing inside was like an Aero chocolate bar. And for me, I was just like, I don't want this. I want an original, so I'll hold out for an original, and I did eventually. And I think that was my view of it. So I suppose the cliff notes is I had a fairly dim view of reproductions then, and I was like, this is a distraction. I want original items. I'm collecting original items. If it's just about the loot, then I'll just buy a book with it all in.
See, that's where the argument's going to lay, isn't it? Because I suppose us four don't give that balanced argument because we're probably all a little bit more invested than let's say Ned. Okay, we've got a bloke called Ned. He's got 3 children at home and works 2 jobs a week. Okay, all his money goes into the family to feed the family, but he has 20 quid to himself each week. He's not a drinker, and Star Wars gives him a time back to a bit of nostalgia, okay?
Yeah.
He hasn't got £100 to go and spend on a blaster. So why shouldn't he be able to pick up dirt cheap beaters and just accommodate them with a £5 repro cape or a £5 repro blaster just to make it look to him like it was as a child? He's not an invested collector. He just wants a throwback to when he was a child. And you've just said an argument which I hear a lot, Lee. Don't have it if you can't afford it. Have a book.
That was just for me. That argument is strictly how I perceived it. Now, I'm not going to turn around and say to this guy, I've been in that same situation in the past. I'm not going to turn around and say to this guy, you can't have these things because you're not as invested in it as I am. But what I will say is that there is absolutely no need for him to have such perfect reproductions, particularly in the weapons, perfect reproductions, that when he eventually grows bored of it and decides to sell up, he'll throw it all on eBay. He won't mention possibly that these are reproduction weapons, and then suddenly, bang, they're into someone's gone and bought them. They've just paid top dollar for this, and half the weapons are reproduction. Or, as we've mentioned before, some new collector, some young lad, some young girl comes in. They want to collect it, but they want the original stuff. They think they've come up on a deal. Bang, they've got a bunch of repro stuff. They've wasted their money. So whilst I understand the position of your mate Ned, that he wants a bit of nostalgia, he wants a bit of that time, and I totally agree and totally support his position on that. We've also got to think about as well how this is going to pan out down the line when that stuff gets liquidated, because it's always new collectors who come on stock. It's not people like us, right? I mean, we've all got at least 20 years in the hobby each. It's not people like us who come on stock. It's young kids who are entering the hobby, who want to be part of this and want the original stuff. They've already got through the thing, well, if I'm going to spend money on this, I want to spend money on the original stuff, not reproductions.
You see Ned, and it goes back to what Lee said, Ned is your target market for your repro makers. Your repro guys, especially the ones now, these are the guys that they want to sell to. This is their market. It's not your older collectors, the guys that are time served. It's the guys that are looking to do something very quickly, very cheaply. That is their market. And what you will find is when somebody's got the collecting bug, ultimately there can be no satisfaction in owning a reproduction item. You will never look at a pop-up R2 that's got a repro label and a repro saber and think, wow, that is fantastic. That will bug you. It will irritate you, and ultimately you will find yourself getting rid of it because it has no value. What you've just spent on a reproduction item, you will never get that money back. Whereas if you invest it in an original piece, and it might be a beta, it might be chewed, it might not have the saber with it or whatever, but you will get your money back at least. And this goes back to what's been said before about there being a false economy. You are wasting money. And this will come up time and time again tonight. And which is why the argument between the four of us sat down here is we're going to be hammering home this same point all night, is there can be no good thing to come from funding the reproduction guys and their sort of enterprises, because nobody really wins. The only guys that win, the people who are making the things and the people that are making the money out of it at the first point. And these are the reproduction makers. So yeah, it's going to be something that's going to crop up several times tonight, I'm sure.
I think as well, all the highly paid consultants who work for Hasbro recognise Ned, and that's where the retro collection has come from.
Exactly. I think to pick up on Craig's point here, this is something which at one time I would have been very anti what Hasbro have done with the retro collection. I was like, why are they doing this? It's lazy. Why are they doing this? Well, you know what? Since it's come out, I think they're great. I really do. I think they're great. Ned can go down to Tesco's, right? You can see them on the shelf at a tenner a pop. They look the part. They're carded. They look the part. They look great. And he can pick them up. He doesn't need to go trawling through eBay for them. He can pick them up. The market's there for him. Hasbro have identified that. They've been responsible with the weapons. They've been responsible with the figures. They've been responsible with the card backs.
So for 20 quid, Ned is getting his vintage fix and he's getting two figures in the bargain.
Great stuff.
He'll never lose any money out of those as well. He'll always get his money back.
Absolutely. What's great about them is that, and I love this about them actually, is that kids are starting to collect them. And it's almost becoming their version of vintage now. Now, some of those kids will come into our sector. Great, Some of them will stay where they are. But from my perspective, what Hasbro have done is they've played a blinded. They really have, and they've been responsible about it. Why I ask is that the repro makers are responsible about it. Some things they've made a start on, but they need to up the game a little bit with this. Let's not be enemies. Let's not turn this into a war, in inverted commas. Let's put an end to this.
Lee, just jumping ahead of something that we were going to bring up, you've brought the retro collection up here.
Yeah.
How different are the weapons? I mean, do these look the same, or are they significantly, noticeably different in hand?
I think they're very. I've not seen them in hand to do float tests with them or anything like that. But from what I can see, and I've looked at some pretty detailed photographs of them, and I've seen them in hand as well. They look the part. They look great. If you're a casual collector who wants the look of them, wants a nice kind of retro shelf in your front room or a Deltoff, they look great. They really do. But to people who are time served in the hobby, time served in vintage, it's not going to fool anybody. They're not engineered to fool anybody. And that's the point. They're engineered to give you them warm and fuzzies of nostalgia.
That leads me on to a natural question, okay? Something you said earlier, okay? A new collector coming into the hobby, okay? Could be a youngster, like you said earlier. What's the difference between them buying a job lot, which has got reproduction weapons because they're inexperienced not being able to tell, and someone who has got a load of vintage figures and has paired them with the retro line weapons, which also look the real deal? They're surely going to be fooled by both if they've not got that experience.
Yeah, but the way I look at this comes down to economy. How many carded retro figures have you got to open to dump all those weapons in with a bunch of loose beaters? Whereas you can go to a reproduction manufacturer and you can pick up those 98% accurate weapons for £1 a piece.
Then take the original layer figure, for example. That was released in the first wave of the retro collection.
Yeah.
That figure's £80 to £100 now loose.
Yeah.
I mean, the gun is a massive part of that price.
Yeah.
So a £10 to top up your figure, which you can then drop into a job lot on eBay.
I mean, the thing is, the layer one's an interesting, because the front end of the layer gun is completely different. The front end that you would see on an original.
But could fall a complete newbie.
It could do, yeah. And again, these are the problems. But let's cut to the chase. We can't uninvent these things.
No.
Right? As it stands right now, we've lost that. We've lost that argument. We can't uninvent them. There's so many of them out there already that if they were to stop now, we would still have the problem. So what I'm arguing for is let's cool our jets. Let's cool our jets and let's open the dialogue where we're not insulting each other. I watched the Retroblasting video and I was there with my head in my hands, because it was 50% of it was just insulting people. And I'm like, you want the dialogue, then you need to cool your jets, man. And it's the same with the anti-repro lot. I've got friends, wonderful people I know, who are so burnt up about this that I want to say to them with love, cool your jets, guys. Let's have the discussion. Let's be able to try and salvage something out of this, because the last thing we want is for, out of spite, people are going to try and destroy the hobby that we have. This isn't just about looking after investments. Yeah, sure, great. Everyone wants to be able to not lose money on what they've done, but it goes beyond that. You get to a point as a collector, and I'm sure you, Craig, Mark, Stuart, you can agree perhaps maybe with this. You go beyond being a collector and you almost become a caretaker for some, for pop cultural history, for pop culture. This stuff is like disappearing. This stuff is going into landfills, and you end up feeling like, well, I'm not interested in the value because I'm not going to sell it. I'm only going to sell it when I'm an old man. I love this hobby. I love this game, right? I love the people that I work with in this. So what this is more for me is the integrity of my collection rather than the value. The repro guys say, oh, it's all about the value. No, it isn't. It really isn't. It's about the integrity of what we've got. It's the thrill of the hunt. It's the integrity of the fact that we've got like toys that are 40 years old that have somehow survived in mint condition. That's great. That's awesome. And that to me is the value of this. And what I ask is that we're allowed to have that. We're allowed to have that too. If you want the repro, Ned wants his repro, I'd say go to the retro collection, ideally. But we've got to reach to a point now, because this is going to go on for the next 5-10 years of us just going over and over and over the same point with them. Got to be some damage limitation.
I mean, I think Ned's already on the verge of being put off. He doesn't know where to stand at the moment.
I've just sold him some stuff.
I bet you have it. Mark, I'm going to come over to you now. This has already been mentioned a few times. I think Lee's already alluded to it as well. So do you think reproduction items would be more accepted if they were clearly marked? Now, I do see online, make them bright colours. I think Rich, when I used to work on the Vintage Rebellion, he was always going, if it was bright green or something, which I don't really think is an argument, because if you want a loose run, you want them to look a little bit correct.
It defeats the object, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does completely defeat the object. I mean, you still want them to look like the thing. If they were maybe slightly different in the markings, and then there is an R or the maker's marking on these things, do you think the community would then say, hey, do you know what? You are marking them, bring them in?
That is a very tough one. I would certainly think that the hardliners would just remain hardline. I think for a lot of people, there's no grey area with this. You're either with them or against them. And that means you're either a supporter of repo or you're not. You're against it 100%. Like I say, there's no grey area. I think there is a degree of grey area with it. I feel that there are certain things that repro guys could be doing which would certainly get them a lot of brownie points. And I think Lee alluded to a few of them earlier on. And one of the things that I think where repro would certainly get a lot of brownie points is things like cardboard inserts for boxes, which 9 times out of 10 they're always missing. If these were done with clear markings and done in a different grade of cardboard or different colour, it would still give the box its shape. It would, a lot of people, when they collect boxed items, they put them on top of one another, and certain boxes are more fragile than others. Having the inserts inside creates rigidity, so it makes the boxes sturdier, it makes them last longer, keeps everything, nice and tidy inside the box rather than loose and jangling around. It's very difficult to display sometimes. So stuff like that, I can totally see where a reproduction item, clearly marked, clearly coloured, or differential from an original, there would be a market for that. Like I say, there is degrees of grey area, but I just can't see a lot of the guys expecting them to be welcomed with open arms. You just can't see it.
I think it'll take time, and there are some people that we know that will never accept it. But I think right now what we've got to consider is damage limitation and not alienate people to such an extreme extent where we end up shooting ourselves in the foot.
I think where we are at the moment, with a lot of the groups taking an anti-repro stance, and they are educating as best they can. There's websites out there like Imperial Gunnery, and there are certain individuals out there on Facebook groups who are putting a lot of time and effort into educating and identification, and these people really need applauding for the time and effort they're putting in, because they're not getting paid for this.
Absolutely.
These people are giving their time and expertise freely. There's no excuse, none whatsoever, to educate yourself on what's a repro and what isn't. It's out there. The information is out there, and the people are out there if you need to ask the questions. I feel where we are at the moment with a lot of groups, I think they're getting it right. I think they are engaging with collectors, specifically new collectors who are asking these questions. They're engaging with them properly. They're answering the questions. They're tagging them in the right direction, giving them links to the right websites to educate themselves. I think as long as you maintain that, and you're not just completely whitewashing it and putting it to one side, pretending as though it doesn't exist. The second you mention repro on certain websites or certain Facebook groups, that's it, you're out. And in my mind, these people need to be communicated with rather than just simply banned.
I agree.
Okay, it's going to come on in a minute to a similar sort of question to that, Mark. So I'll get you to elaborate in a minute. You've just brought up the groups, the Facebook groups in particular, especially in this video, are accused of being, I think the words elitist and draconian in their views, both mentioned when it comes to repro and the way it treats people who own or support repro items. They name a few groups actually out loud. We know you've said the Imperial Gunnery. I think the Imperial Gunnery, when they accuse people of it all being for monetary reasons, the Imperial Gunnery have been putting together that guide for, well over a decade, way before money was an issue in the hobby. And they call out the two biggest UK selling groups, and they call out two of the biggest American selling groups. Just out of interest, Craig or anybody here, does anyone know kind of what the rules state in these groups? Is it all very similar?
Their stance is similar, but the way they say it differs, and that's noticeable between the American groups and the British groups. I mean, that video that we sort of kick-started this conversation with, it's less of a reasoned argument between the pros and cons of repro. It's more of just a takedown of individuals and where this guy's found hypocrisy, and it's about people. I thought it was very interesting just to look at the rules, because they all take a similar stance on repro, and we've touched on the attitudes of the hardliners, and I think that's where that's why we're discussing this, because it's so inflammatory and it's makes such drama. But the way that they state these rules is very interesting. So I'm just going to read a couple out. So I've got Bespin Prime here, and this is their group rules from their admin. And their first rule is help each other out, which I think is great. And their second rule is be cool. Their third rule is we are a community first. And it's not until 0.5 out of 10 that they mention repros. So their headline for that is customs are cool, repro is not. Customs are cool, reproduction is not. Simply put, and sell customs but not repro, and don't promote repro in our group, please. So they're making the distinction between customs and repro, which I think is important, and they're being polite about it. If you look at the Imperial Commissary, they're a little bit straighter. In my day job, I advise brands on tone of voice a lot. And this is what this is all about. You can have these stances, but the way you sort of start the conversations is important. So the Imperial Commissary is very similar. Any repro postings will be deleted. I mean, that's quite a hard line, but it's not, it's not particularly rude. It's just being factual. But then when you go to Echo Base, I think Echo Base are great. They've got a great ecosystem going. They've got lots of strands. It's all presented very well. But their group rules, as it's stated here, I'm just going to read a few bits out and just see what you think to this tone of voice. No phishing posts. It's either for sale or it's not! ! No shit posting. Keep your pictures of Death Star barbecues, Star Destroyer shaped clouds, and other tat for your own page! ! Don't be a dick. Speaks for itself, really. And their last point is no hate speech or bullying. Make sure everyone feels safe. Bullying of any kind isn't allowed. And it's just, I don't know, that rankles me. It's coming at me with a slightly aggressive tone as a collector. So I look at this video that Mr. whatever his name is, Mr. Retroblasting has created, and he's reacting to that tone, isn't he? He's reacting to that attitude and this talk of death threats and this, like I say, hyperbole over repro. So I think we all share the same view, I think, but how you approach it is important. And there's some nuance there that needs to be appreciated.
Yeah.
Back to what what Lee's saying about cooling your jets. That I find that as a set of rules, it's neither straightforward or friendly. It's just a little bit antagonistic.
Mark, you kind of just answered some of this in your last point, but I will read my whole question again as I put it to you, just in case there's anything that triggers anything different in your response, okay? So in the Retroblasting video, Michael calls out the groups for their hardline stance on repro. Craig's just named them. I think Bespin Prime, Imperial Commissary, Echo Base. I think Jabbers is also mentioned, and Imperial Gunnery is mentioned for, I think it's more about the person that was associated with the page. And I think there was a couple of other smaller ones, but these are the main ones that they attacked. What he says is called them out for their hardline stance on repro. If people discuss or try and sell repro, they are automatically banned. He accuses certain groups of trying to dictate the hobby with these actions. I don't agree with those views, first of all. When people put time and effort, it's the same as us doing a podcast here. If you're putting time and effort into something, we don't do anything for financial gain. We do it because of a love for the hobby. If they are our set of rules, so Echo Base, yes, they might be a very harsh line, but that is their set of rules. That is their group. They are the people that spend their time, putting their time and effort into that group. So if that is what their rules are, that is what their rules are. You abide by them or you don't be part of that group. I get that, okay? However, there is an argument that these groups, rather than banning instantly, use their platform to educate against the reproduction. I think you've already said that, Mark, and alluded to that, and perhaps include some tolerance in people having them in their collections. I mean, for example, like Ned, perhaps he would maybe be on the ban list for owning these in his loose run. They don't need to allow sales, we get that, and scammers of course should be banned, but is it time to find a happy medium where these items can be accepted to a certain level and controlled within the group, rather than sending these people away to somewhere else where they just breed in that area of the hobby? Is that saying, isn't it, about keeping your enemies close? Because they might not be your enemy, but you know what I mean, with reproduction weapons. Is it better to have them in your group where you can help educate them and help guide them, but give them that little bit of tolerance rather than pushing it away and then buying and selling that stuff on eBay and then causing a wider problem?
I think that is already the case with a lot of groups. I understand that when somebody posts up on one of the Facebook groups and there's repro in there, you will always get the odd moron that is just absolutely, you can't have repro, blah, blah, and it becomes a slangy match. It's embarrassing to see grown people become children over what could ultimately be an innocent post. This person doesn't quite understand the level of hatred that a lot of people have towards it. So it is a bit of a lion's den sometimes. But, and this is the big but, and I want to make this point because I think this is important. There's no skill or talent to start in a Facebook group at all. Anybody can do it. You just tap it in, create a new Facebook group, call it whatever. This is what we stand for. Off you go. Invite your friends. And from there, it evolves. But what they are, and this is like some of the bigger groups and some of the more successful groups, is they are people's time, they are people's energy and expertise and goodwill that is freely given. Nobody on these admin pages, none of these admin are paid for what they do. And let me tell you something from experience. when you are answering questions from people day in, day out, what's this worth? Have you got this? I want to buy that. Do you want to buy this? Where can I get these from? When you get a dozen of those messages every single day, your tone can ultimately come across quite aggressive. And I understand that. I really do. Don't get me wrong. There are some admin out there that are on a complete ego trip. From experience, a majority of the guys that I know that admin these Facebook groups are good guys. Their heart is in the right place. They are very passionate and very willing to help people. If the question is asked, they will help 99% of the time. You might catch one on a bad day every now and again. That's understandable. We all have them. Believe you me, there are morons in all walks of life. But I think, and this goes back to your question, Stu, is I think that a lot of the groups have got it right. The information that is being garnered at the moment by some of the guys out there, and I'm not going to rattle off names because ultimately I will forget somebody, but the Jabbers, Echoes, these guys are doing good work when it comes to reproduction and identifying and educating. And this is the key word with what we're talking about at the moment, education, understanding what the downfall, what the pitfalls are involved with dealing in repro, buying repro. How best am I able to get out there and collect properly? I honestly believe that a lot of the Facebooks have got it right. Yes, more can be done, but, you know, it's a learning curve. Everybody's in this, you know, reproduction is getting better. The guys doing the hard work on the front line, they are, you know, finding better ways to put together this information and put it out there so that we can all benefit from it. There's no reason whatsoever, if you want to get into collecting, there's no reason whatsoever for you to educate yourself just a little tiny bit before you jump in with 2 feet and start posting up on established groups with established guys and start, you know, coming across like the great I am. It's just not going to work. Take a bit of time, do a bit of research and go from there. There's no such thing as a stupid question if you don't know the answer.
I think the mechanics of the groups make it easy as well, don't they? So I'm a member of the Echo database, and there's not a day goes by where there's something I don't scroll past that somebody flagging something or making a query, and I'm rather than seeking it out, I'm taking that in by osmosis all the time.
But what about Ned? He's put together the first 12 and 8 of them have got reproduction weapons, okay? And he's come on and he's mentioned it. Now, these groups might say, hey, you can't do that, you know, that's not the right idea. Well, they're not banning him. But then he disappears a bit. He takes a back seat. Rather than showing his display and getting education, he decides to not post a photo of his collection. Is it time to say, okay, you've got them in your collection, but here's what you can do. Here's a better option. Here's this, here's that, rather than just making them feel uncomfortable. I would love to know. I mean, Echo Base, we're going that because that is the biggest of the UK groups, okay? Echo Base, I don't know how many members it's got, but I wonder how many members there have at least one item in their collection that is reproduction. And I bet you it's a lot higher than what a lot of them will admit.
I would totally agree with you. And a lot of that is knowing that it's reproduction or not knowing that it's reproduction. I bet there's guys out there who think they know it's real or think it's real, and actually, lo and behold, it isn't.
I have one piece of reproduction in my office where I sit, and I know it's reproduction and it annoys me, but I also know how difficult that piece is going to be for me to find, and I am on the lookout for it, but the chance of it coming up loose is going to be really slim, and I purely have it to keep a box in shape, okay?
Cool, what is it?
It's an inlay for one of the blasters, okay?
Oh, right, okay.
But the box isn't a cheap box, it doesn't come up very often, and the inlay came with it. The person said to me, look, I'm not selling this with the box, but I will put it in because it keeps the shape of the box, and I've kept it in there for that reason, okay? So, I mean, I'm going to ask you three, okay? I've just been totally honest there. Any of you got any reproduction that you're aware of in your collections?
The only thing I've got that's reproduction is I bought the Mark Poon Palatoy Stormtrooper card because this was at a time when these were coming out and I wanted to know how good they were in hand. So I did actually figured, right, okay, I need to get one to see how good they are and to see if I've got anything to worry about. It turned out that I got hold of it and I saw the quality of it, and again it looks the part, and it looks the part for people who want a casual piece. digital printing. The bubble is taped down. It's the reproduction figure that's inside. So I've got a little sort of fun shelf in my front room. I don't keep my collection in my front room. Just a little fun shelf of just random things, all sorts of things, like sort of there's a Toy Biz RoboCop on there, you know. So it's just a bit of kind of pop culture stuff, and I just have that just there, just as a you know, just something just to glance at. I wouldn't actually say it's part of my collection, you know. It's just something I have as a display. And the only reason I bought it was to see how close he had got to doing perfect reproductions, which in this case he didn't.
I never think Poon is frowned upon quite as much as other reproduction people in the community. There is a bit of a different backstory there, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, he wasn't mega popular on Rebel Scum. I will tell you now for what happened, but the culture was different, and the view was perhaps a little bit more nuanced than it is now. So, you know, if you looked at his Rocket Boba Fett's, the majority of the repro Rocket Boba Fett's that are out there come from the Mark Poon stable of reproductions. And I can guarantee, coming back to when we were talking about people on popular Facebook groups having at least one reproduction item in their collection, well, perhaps I could posit that they would maybe have a Mark Poon Rocket Fett in there, or the Mark Poon Kit Bashed Boba Fett is in there. You know, so from that perspective, yeah, I mean, you might find some odd bits like this. And Mark Poon perhaps has a subtly different history with the hobby than perhaps some of the more contemporary repro producers.
Interesting.
I'm ending all of this. The tree, the text, the Jedi. I'm going to burn it down.
Now, Craig, I'm going to return to something that we covered in an early edition of Those Old Fossils. And that was I'm sure we'll all remember it, the Kim Simmons book, which was placed on Kickstarter. And it was coming along nicely, getting backed. And then it got backed by The Fans Strike Back, a site which is run by Chris Smith, a known customizer and reproduction producer. And we're going to get onto him a bit later because, again, Retroblasting defends him quite stoutly on there. But there was an outcry from the community. These same groups, again, put a lot of pressure on Kim, and Kim eventually rejected the money to make sure the community stayed on side. Of course, they are his market. You know, I get Kim's decision. He doesn't want to upset 2,000 people who potentially could back his book. Now, I'm not totally sure, but if memory served, the donation was around 3k. And of course, that is a substantial backing on any Kickstarter plan. And yes, The Fans Strike Back would have been named in the book as a supporter, but would a name in a book really create a host of people to buy reproduction items? Whereas losing a donation of that size to someone like Kim and his project, that could have seen him fail to cross the line and risk losing a project that the community would potentially love. So in hindsight, looking back at that debacle, do you think the community acted in the correct spirit? And do you feel Kim made the right decision and backed down and rejected it, especially when he's not in either camp? When it comes to reproduction, I don't think he gives two hoots about it. I mean, he's not a collector. He doesn't use repro weapons as far as I'm aware in his images, and he doesn't publicly back against reproduction. What are your thoughts now in hindsight? I mean, we all were like, he shouldn't be doing this at the time.
Yeah, it was back on show 12. If anybody wants to go and check that one out, we did discuss it at some length. In hindsight, I mean, there is part of me that looks at this situation and it's a bit like they're bullying an old man who looks like my dad. You know, I don't think, like you say, the issue of repros would have sat very high on his agenda at all. He was doing his thing, making his money, making his books. And I think there were a lot of characters around him that I think this sits with more. They were helping him run the Kickstarter, who were more of his voice in the situation. Do I think the community acted in the right spirit? I mean, we've established it's a very vocal community, one that does gravitate towards drama. And it's a very emotive topic, clearly. And this was in the community a really nice, convenient, high-profile platform for them to raise their concerns. So they absolutely did that. I understand that. I think, you know, some of the debate around it, as always with these things, it's the language and the attitude that I find over the top. It's not their stance on fakes in the market. So I do understand it. I think it could have been perhaps been a bit more gracious in its approach, but it was what it was. Do I think he made the right decision. I mean, ultimately, it didn't affect the publishing of the book, did it? It still came out. He still found the money. If I was him, to have got the to make this go away, to make the noise go away, I probably would have done the same thing. Especially when I knew that, down the line I wanted to milk the legacy a bit more and bring Volume 3 out, which he's just launched. So,
Mark and Lee, are you in the same camp as Craig on that?
I think it's a very tough one. Essentially, Kim Simmons isn't invested either way in this. He really isn't. He's not a collector. He's a guy who worked on the line 30, 40 years ago. And I actually do understand the anti-repro line against this, of dissuading Kim from accepting this, right? Because as it stands at the moment, fans strike back, etc., are causing lots of problems. So there is no platform for them. I mean, one of the things I do agree with is that you should have the right in your Facebook groups to say whether or not repro is allowed to be promoted. And I know from my Facebook groups that I'm in, it's not. And you like Marcus said, you put the time and the effort unpaid into this. You should have the right to say your own rules, and that there's no platform for reproduction. Could this ever be something that is redressed and considered? Well, a lot of that depends upon the actions of the people who make the reproductions, and it also then depends on the individual decisions of those communities and of those Facebook communities. And I think what happened with the Kim Simmons thing, that is really just an extension of this. It was a deplatforming of Fan Strike Back, because the reason they gave £3,000 away, and no one gives £3,000 away for nothing, was to open up a new market. And I think you have the right to turn around and say no, particularly if the people around Kim Simmons who are helping him with this project, who are partners of this project, if they are partners of this project, if they have a say in this, then if that's what they say, then shouldn't their decision stand?
Okay, let me put this to you then. Okay, one of your reasons earlier for not supporting repros is every time you give them a bit of money, it goes back into the system for creating better reproductions. Okay. So how about that he takes 3K that he's possibly earned from his reproductions and he's putting it into a project which will benefit the community, and that 3K isn't going into making better reproductions? Yeah,
but we know for a fact that no one dumps 3K into anything, Stuart, without seeing a return.
He would always put whatever money back in. That $3,000 would probably, he would spend it on another way to advertise his product. As far as I'm concerned, the way that I look at it is, if it were my book, would I want this guy's money? And the answer is an emphatic no, I wouldn't, because I don't want to benefit from reproduction in that way, and I certainly wouldn't want to think that people who are going to buy my book are going to see me as benefiting from reproduction. And I know what we've said, Kim hasn't got a vested interest in reproduction one way or another. He doesn't care. Ultimately, it's his decision. It's his book. It's his decision. He decided to turn the donation, or refund the donation, and that's completely up to him. I personally think it's the right decision, and if it were my book, I'd do exactly the same.
Yeah, like Craig just said, it thankfully it didn't affect the outcome of it. In fact, I should think after he turned it down, I would imagine some of the community pulled forces and maybe donated when they wouldn't have done, because he did do the right thing. So, and now we're seeing more come out. So, in hindsight, it was a good thing, but it could have been a defining factor which didn't see it cross the line. But yeah, that's fair enough. Now, Lee, we also saw the community round on Fanfatrax recently when they posted an interview with Chris Smith, the man behind the Fan Strike Back. Now, Fanfatrax is a Star Wars site, reports on all aspects of Star Wars, but again, certain areas of the community turned on Fanfatrax, and eventually Mark Newbold had to post a grovelling apology in these groups stating that he didn't realise the upset it would cause, and they then removed the article. Fanfatrax were then attacked by the masses from the repro supporting side, basically the opposite reasons for the anti-repro side, saying, you're a Star Wars site, you're meant to cover all bases. So do you think this was fair to put Fanfatrax on the spot like that when they are purely reporting on the whole of the hobby, not just toys, everything from movies to slippers to anything at all? Weren't they just covering the hobby and doing what they are meant to do?
journalists in all walks of life are lobbied by special interest groups. Okay, we see it in politics, we see it in mainstream journalism. They're always lobbied by special interest groups. The editorial decisions that they make are theirs and theirs alone. If Mark Newbold decided to remove that content, then that is his decision and his decision alone as an editorial decision. He chose to listen. It's up to him whether or not he listens to any of those special interest lobby groups. And that is basically what my view of this is. So whether or not he did the right thing to remove it or he should have kept it up, that's entirely his decision as the editor.
I do find that was a different scenario to something like the Kim Simmons book.
Yeah.
I did think to myself, well, I didn't read the article. It was taken down before I'd had a chance to read it, so I don't know whether it was praising what the Fan Strike Back produced or whatnot. I'm not sure what was in the actual article.
At the end of the day, that editorial decision is Mark Newbold's. It's no one else's, and it can be lobbied by anybody.
He was in a no-win situation, wasn't he? He got lobbied by the anti-repro, take it down, the other side have a pop, and you're just like, well,
So both sides have to respect that editorial decision.
I'm going to come over to you, Mark. Now, I know we've already had Lee's opinion on this, but one accusation made from the video and from the repro loving side is that the people that are heavily pushing the anti-repro stance are heavily indebted in the hobby as traders. We know that he was pinpointing to someone linked with the Imperial Gunnery, someone that was linked with the Imperial Commissary, in particular on this accusation. By forcing out reproductions, it keeps the prices of the originals extremely high. So as traders, they're getting what they want. Although one of the sellers he's accusing of, which I just mentioned a minute ago, did a lot of the legwork on the Imperial Gunnery way before these prices rocketed. Do you think there is any truth in these accusations?
I don't think so. I think when you make comments like that, I think you do yourself a disservice, and I think you end up shooting yourself in the foot. There would have to be a lot of time and energy and money involved in a group of traders coming together to organise what effectively would be a cartel, to almost like the diamond industry, basically keeping the prices artificially high for something really and truthfully would be very, very hard to control. I mean, this stuff exists in vast numbers outside of, there's thousands of these, hundreds of thousands of these items in all places. There isn't like a magical mine where this stuff is coming out of. This stuff is everywhere. And in order to keep prices artificially high, you would have to have an incredible amount of control in order to keep those prices high. I mean, traders don't dictate prices. If a trader puts a price on something and it doesn't sell, that's not the trader dictating a price for something. That's a collector. That's a buyer. They're the ones that are in control of the prices. If it sells for an item, well, then it sets a precedent for other items to sell for a certain amount of money, as we have seen recently with certain last 15 figures, last 17, just all of a sudden going through the roof. This isn't one or two people keeping control of a market. It's too big. It's too big. And I personally do not see where he's coming from this. I really don't. I think it was more of a personal jibe than it was a factual one. That's my impression of those comments.
Yeah, it was a very lazy swipe, that was. You can sort of see there's some logic there, but it wasn't very well thought out, and just felt a bit desperate at those comments.
I felt it was a bit of a straw man argument because it was making a very simplistic argument that somehow those who are anti-repro are economically invested in this, and those who make the repro are somehow altruistic individuals who are doing this for the good of everyone, who are doing it for Ned, especially for Ned, and they're not making any money off it themselves, which is utterly disingenuous as a point.
I mean, I do think we need to get Ed on for an interview at some point.
Is his name Ed or Ned?
Ned.
Ned.
We need Ned on.
So I think we all agree with that, and I think we're all right there. I think it was an easy shot. I think we're all in the same camp with that. Now, I want to have a look at a handful of the main creators of reproductions. Let's just talk about what we know about the Fan Strike Back, because Retroblasting really defend Chris Smith on this video. So first of all, what do we know that the Fan Strike Back? So if we go to his website, I'm not going to advertise that on here. Straight away on the opening screen, you have Star Wars, G.I. Joe, Transformers, He-Man, all advertised. when it comes to Star Wars, we'll get to accessories in a minute, but on his main page, he does a custom bantha. I think that's acceptable. All agree?
Yeah, I think that's
produced. Yeah.
Yep.
And then he does a carded collection run. So they're all set out like the Power of the Force. We've got EV-99 on a card, Stormtrooper, Boba Fett. This is where it starts to get a bit muddied, isn't it? Right, he's got a slave Leia. We know that figure wasn't created for that. Let's look at EV-99 then. So what is that going for now? Between 100 and 150 quid for a loose EV-99?
With an intact arm, probably a bit more now.
Yeah. So he's doing this is $50 for this figure. Okay. I can't see that he's got any markings on it.
Is this the loose one or the carded one?
This is the loose one. So he does it loose, and he also does it on a card. Just going through it. See, the customs I've not got a problem with. He's got a custom black pop-up R2Q5. He's got a custom Shadow Trooper. I mean, they weren't released. There's not a problem. But he's then got like custom carded Uzai cards. Now, I'm not sure the range that was out on them, but they look familiar. So I think they are probably reproductions. And then if you click on Star Wars and you go to accessories, I think this is where the issue is. So again, there's a third leg for R2 and all that kind of stuff to make that different. But you do have Luke's Stormtrooper helmet, replacement or reproduction. It's got on there. Again, it's not a lot of money. You're talking $10 for it, but no sign of it being. He's got on his website not to be resold as original, but there's no comment here that there's any marking on it, which I think if you're a reproduction maker, you would surely stay there on your website.
It's the things he highlights and focuses on, isn't it? So the features of the weapons, yes, they float, translucent under light, soft, high-quality plastic. So it's all the stuff that we look for as tells.
I mean, this is the best box, isn't it? He does 100 Star Wars action figure replacement weapons bulk box.
Yeah.
So 100 weapons, which I'm sure is what you're looking at, Craig. It's saying they float. New high quality reproduction. Available weapons shown and listed below. You can create your own mix of what you need. When you look through his list, there is literally everything covered there, near enough. So he's literally producing any weapon you need for your collection. You can buy double telescoping lightsaber replacements. I mean, there's just little things, but that's not all about Chris Smith. That's by the by. We know that he produces these things, and some will argue that they're customs. He's calling them reproductions on his website, so he's not trying to hide that fact. This chap has got a shady past, hasn't he? He used sales websites Gumtree and Spock, as well as Facebook, to sell fake football kits. They were counterfeit football kits. But when his house was raided for this, they found 70 boxes containing more than 2,000 of these items. I don't want to go into too much about that story, but that just gives you a bit of background about this stand-up bloke who Retroblasting are defending. So clearly this is where he focuses on. So that's your first person we're going to look at. Okay, and you can see why the community have an issue with someone. That's just two areas. I'm sure if we dug deep on him, you find all sorts of things. But for being convicted of something like that, I think straight away puts him in a shady light, and I can understand why he is banned from many of the groups.
Ultimately, it's criminal activity, isn't it? Ultimately, when you actually get down to the bottom line, it is, and there's no question about it. There's no grey area, black and white. It is criminal activity. You are infringing on copyright. You are not paying a license fee. You are profiting from somebody else's intellectual rights, intellectual property. So ultimately, it is criminal what he is doing. So let's just get to the bottom line. That's what it is. This is why people are against a lot of genuine collectors, a lot of, and rightly so. Let's not, mess about. They do not see any place for this guy's creations in the community, because he is creating items that are not marked in many ways. I know he's putting on his website not to be sold as genuine, but once it's sold and it gets into somebody else's hands, that's it. As far as he can say, he's wiped his hands of it. It's up to whoever buys it, whether they disclose whether it's reproduction or not. Yeah, it's understandable why this guy has generated as much anger and frustration as he has done. And I know that he has marked some of his figures, some of his last 17 figures. I think Lee mentioned his yak face earlier. And yeah, I can see why there is the anger around the guy. I really do.
Yeah, exactly. And you're right. I mean, it is just counterfeiting more goods. And if Hasbro wanted to, they could probably take the bloke down quite quickly.
Well, this is the other thing that amazes me, is that this guy has got what seems to be quite a professional outfit. He isn't knocking this stuff together in his garage. I mean, this looks like it's being manufactured out in the Far East, and he's buying it in bulk load and then shipping it over and then piecing it together. And I have seen a couple of items close up, so they do look really, really good. He's not hand painting these. These things are really well done. He's gone to a lot of time, effort and money to create this stuff. Yeah, it's not what I would call a cottage industry. It looks pretty professional.
So moving on to the next one, Craig, Mark Poon's already come up several times, but can you just give us the back behind him, the backstory?
Yeah, I mean, as Lee said already, he's a active customizer since the early 2000s, sort of famous for items that people would struggle to get. So, the rocket firing Fets we've mentioned, and reproduction Vlixes. But I guess one of the things he's associated with more than anything is the stormtroopers. So he produces like stormtroopers in black plastic, or they're painted black, and the white ones. And I guess if you pick on the white ones particularly, because they are figures that are more likely to fool people. Although for my money, there's nothing raises a red flag more than a super mint white stormtrooper. So I think they're going to garner a lot more attention, I think, if they're super nice, clean stormtroopers. So I think certainly those people in the know, there's a lot being written. There's a lot of guidance online, particularly good write-up about his work on Imperial gunnery, which flags sort of some of the variants and some of the things to look for with these stormtroopers.
Is he still active?
So no. Well, he's not visible. Whether or not he's still active in producing these things, or if he's moved on, that's a different question. In terms of visibility, he's not really visible in the game anymore.
Now, Lee, sticking with you. Now, this one amazed me, and I've seen him around. Blue Snagman, obviously, I guess the name does produce a lot of blue Snaggletooths, but he seems to get a bit of a free pass. And I then found this thread on Rebel Scum, and someone has said, why does this bloke get a free pass? And he went, that's just Todd. He's a nice guy, but we just laugh at him. So just because he's a nice guy, does that give you a free pass to be able to try to fool him? Because his blue snags in an image look the real deal.
I think perhaps this is me being a bit cynical, but I think there was a bit of a history of people buying legit stuff from Blue Snagman, and they didn't want to muddy that water in the past, and I think that in history, I think that was perhaps why he was treated a little bit more leniently than, let's say, Mark Poon was treated.
So basically, what other people, we still see people buying stuff off Toy Tony's Facebook group, eBay group, don't you, when it suits them?
Exactly.
The same people shouting about him on a forum thread, and then the next day they're posting up a picture of some mint toy they've bought off him.
And
double standards.
You can spot a legit Toy Tony sourced piece a mile off. If you've got yourself an AFA 90 Meccano square carded Jawa with a mint clear bubble, it's probably Tony's. Yeah,
I was just a bit amazed that this bloke got because his stuff's still very active on eBay as well. And that moves us on to away from the toys, Mark, but to the packaging. Replicator boxes and inserts. And this is Darren Orme, who to me has got some bad form as well.
I mean, this guy has been around for quite a while now. He concentrates on what I would consider the easiest thing to replicate and mass produce relatively quickly and easily, and that's the packaging. Once you've got a box and you've opened it out and flattened it out, scanned it, retouched it in Photoshop, you've bought yourself a large scale printer, it is literally a license to print money. And like I say, he's been around for quite a while now, and he does a lot of reproduction boxes, so existing stuff, but he also does a lot of custom stuff. At this point, I just want to make out the point that custom and repro, two different things, completely two different things. So let's just, make that clear. We're talking about guys that are reproducing existing items that are made to look and feel like originals and pass them off as originals, whether they like to admit it or not. They're in it for the money and to fool collectors. This isn't some guy, creating a custom figure out of a beta figure for his own collection. This is entirely different. Basically, he's been around for a while. He sells a lot on eBay. His product is really quite poor. They are inkjets, so they do not last very long at all. And even if you were to put it in an acrylic case and put it on a shelf out of sunlight, you better believe that that box will start to fade after a while. That's just the nature of inkjets. They just do not hold their vibrancy at all, certainly over time. And they have quite a chalky feel to them as well. I've held a couple, and they have like quite a matted, not like a litho printed box where you've got that sheen to it. It's a different thing. They're mostly hand cut as well. So, it's very easy to see scalpel marks where he's gone along with his rule and he's been a bit careless and cut into it. These aren't sort of die cut boxes, quite sort of poor. He has upped his game, I think, in recent times. Some of the recent boxes I've seen are slightly better. His 12-inch boxes specifically do look very good, but they look too good. So it's quite easy to spot them. A bit like a Terminator. The old ones were easy to spot. The new ones are a bit harder. Just sort of going off his website, he's got quite an elaborate website. There's a lot of stuff on there that he's done. A lot of rare boxes for rare items. So if you've got a loose A-wing, you want a droid's box, he's got it there. I think I remember seeing him ask for people with certain pieces in their collections, if he could borrow the items so that he could scan them and then knock them off. I don't know what their remuneration was in exchange for that service, but I do remember seeing him ask for people's rare pieces in the collection so he could copy them. And there were takers, believe it or not, established collectors who were quite happy to send their rare items to him to be copied. So he's doing quite a lot of boxes, inserts, play sets even. He does, believe it or not, do a Palatoy Death Star play set, just the cardboard elements, mind you. So basically all the cardboard pieces that you need for a cardboard Death Star, and he charges the incredible amount of £150. £150 for a copy of a Palatoy Death Star. Now, to put that into context, I did just a quick bit of research. An original one sold on eBay. It had got a bit of wear, but it was all the cardboard parts to it, including the cardboard ring at the top, none of the plastic elements. A rather battered box with the flaps missing at the end, but still, it was a starting point for somebody to piece together a Palatoy Death Star, and that was only £50 more for the genuine article. Now, put that into context. If you wanted to sell the reproduction, you wouldn't get anywhere near 150 quid. You probably wouldn't even get 20 quid for it. An original, you will always get your money back and possibly make money on it. So it goes back to what we were saying earlier on about a false economy. It doesn't make sense. And I've gone back and I've made a couple of comparisons for things that I've seen on his website price-wise. So a Rebo bandbox, let's say, on a Replicator website, it's £25 with the insert, including postage. I found one on eBay in relatively good order. There was no insert to it, but the box was genuine. The flaps were there. There's no rips. There was no tears. It was in good order, and that was £40. So there's a £15 difference there between a copy, which is practically worthless once you bought it, to an original item, which is only ever going to add value to your original figures. And the satisfaction, knowing that you've got an original piece, rather than spending something that will ultimately look terrible in about 12 months' time because the colours are faded and it's knocked and worn, because you only have to touch these boxes for them to get a fingerprint on them or wear. The quality just isn't there. And again, Snow Speeder with instruction sheet on the website, it's £35. That's excluding postage. An original one on eBay in good order with the instruction sheet sold for £42. So there's a £7 difference, just a £7 difference between having a genuine one and a copy. Now, if you were to hold those two things up to somebody with half an ounce of intelligence and you said, which one would you rather have? The copy at £35 or the original at £42? Which do you think they're going to choose? Of course, it's going to be the original one, because you're only ever going to see your money back at the very least. It doesn't make any sense. And get this, right? Get this. An Empire Strikes Back Falcon box, on his website, that item will cost you £60 plus postage. On eBay recently, I found an ESB Falcon box with the original Star Wars image for £42. That was just the box. There was no toy. It was just the box. £42. That makes his £18 more expensive. So again, this goes back to what we're saying about collecting and about how you collect. And it's worth putting the time in. If you've got the passion for it and you're prepared to learn and run the marathon rather than the sprint, you're going to get so much more out of it, both financially and, you know, becoming part of a community and learning, understanding, putting together a collection. It just makes more sense. I don't see any satisfaction in buying a reproduction item like this. None whatsoever.
I mean, one of the things I would also like to make a point of is Retroblasting said that vintage collectors who are anti-repro are elitist. Well, I'd argue that that's incorrect, because if you are collecting on a budget, there is plenty of things out there that are in your price range. Particularly if you're looking at Darren Orm's stuff and you're prepared to pay £60 for a reproduction box. Well, I will tell you now, if you've got 400 quid to spare, right, with a bit of time, a little bit of nous and a little bit of patience, I could put you together a cracking little collection that would be infinitely more satisfying than modern produced boxes. It just takes a bit of time and a little bit of imagination and effort. That's all it takes. This isn't an elitist hobby. Despite what people say this isn't, there is stuff out there for everyone, for all budgets. You don't have to spend £5,000 on an AFA graded Palatoy Death Star. You can pick one up for 300 quid in a box and it'll be really nice. You just got to look. You've just got to find them. I bought, and Mark will remember this because you were with me at the NEC. Do you remember, Mark, when I bought that Palatoy Death Star for £320?
I do.
And it was cracking. It was ace. And that's in my collection now. And that wasn't very long ago. That was just a couple of years ago. And there was another one there that was at £800, and it wasn't as good as the one I picked up. You can find them. If you've got a budget, don't be scared of it. Just go and look, go and dig. And that's where the fun comes in. That hunter-gatherer thing. That's where the fun, the thrill of the hunt comes in, because you will find them. You know, I picked up, it was actually highlighted to me by friends at the NEC. And you were there, Mark. I picked up a next to perfect Popper Party with the original saber, everything, £150. Now, if you go and buy a reproduction, how much are reproductions? 50, 60 quid, something like that? I don't know. You don't have to spend £350 on a Popper Party. You can find one for 100 quid. You can find one for 150. They are out there. That's the thrill of it. And network. What I'd say to new collectors, don't collect in a vacuum. You network with people. The more people you know, the more people you're friends with, the more your net is widened, and the more people will find things for you, right? You're not on your own. So that to me is the antithesis of being elitist. You've just got to have some investment in the scene. You've just got to have some investment in the community. And this is what this really comes down to with new collectors. Just have some investment in the community, and that you're not collecting in a vacuum.
Totally.
I would just like to mention a couple of things to do with Darren Orm, because obviously, Lee, we had, it was probably 4 or 5 years ago now at Farthest From, but yeah, we sat in the pub and we had the display box. I think the feel of it and the way it was printed, you could tell it wasn't a legit item.
Yeah, I mean, you looked at the small print, and you couldn't read the small print on the box.
No,
it was very, very blurry. You could tell it's like a second or third generation scan of composite of the original.
Yeah, exactly. And I know, Mark, you just mentioned customs. You were saying that there's a distinction between customs and some of the stuff he does to his customs. But I'm also aware that you designed a piece and he basically customised your custom, which was an absolute disgrace.
They say, don't they, that imitation is the highest form of flattery. Well, I'm sorry, but that just is not the case.
No. And it was awful.
I was so disgusted by it. I really was. And he'd taken my design and made it cheaper and far more awful looking than I could
It
possibly
really was as well, wasn't it? He'd taken the character out of it, hadn't he?
It just looks so terrible. And you know something? In the amount of times I'll see pictures of people's collections, 9 times out of 10, it's Boba Fett collectors, Boba Fett focus collectors, and they have that display in the background, and it really galls me. I think, God damn it.
Well, do you know what? It's one of the things that I'm amazed at. So I was on his Facebook group for a long while. So when I did a little bit about him and was having a little kind of like nose around, and the amount of people that are on there going, oh, this is brilliant. I can put my figures into how I remember opening them up, and you're just talking about the prices, the difference in them. But people are lapping it up, and he has got, I mean, you just said some people were willing to give him the scans, but he's got scans of everything. He's got all the bell displays. He's got literally everything, which I also find incredible. And they are marked, okay? They're marked with Replicator or whatever it is on it. But apparently, if you get close enough to him and then request that to be removed, he will print them. Now, I've got no proof of that, but the word is that he will then print them without that written on them. So there is other people out there we haven't touched on. People like Stan Solo, again, quite a up-to-date person who's burning these things. But I just wanted to give an overview of different areas.
I do not fear the dark side as you do. I have brought peace, freedom, justice, and security to my new empire.
Your new empire?
So I want to come on to just looking at maybe areas where reproductions could be considered fine if they were marked fine. We've already mentioned inserts. I mean, a box with an insert helps it keep its shape, helps it display better. I think if it's clearly marked, I kind of see why someone would do that, just to keep the box in shape.
One of the areas that seems to get slightly more of a free pass, and probably with reasonable reason, is foams. Now, if you look at the foams on Dagobah playsets, you look at the foams on the Chewbacca bandoliers, you look at the foams on the American Death Star, a lot of that foam is completely degraded, and virtually none of it is intact anymore. Even if you were to buy a shop stock one and open it, Dagobah, you've got a pretty good chance that the foam will be tacky, it will be collapsing, and it will be sticking to the side of the playset, and it will look pretty grim. Is there a reasonable justification for reproducing these? Possibly. Again, you can go back to things like the tin robot scene, where there may be a component that always fails. And so someone's like reproduced the component that makes the robot work. So again, is that a grey area? Possibly. Is there no alternative? Well, maybe that's not so much of a massive issue. If no originals are in existence anymore and they've all degraded, what do you guys think? Do you think there is a justification for someone producing ones, brand new ones, if original ones all of them have pretty much decayed?
I would be fine with it because, like you say, it doesn't matter if it's mint or not, unused. The fact of the matter is it degrades over time, whether you're using it or not, provided it was, maybe a different colour or whatever, then do I have a problem with it? No, not really, because it's one of those pieces that is going to, disintegrate anyway. Yeah, no, I think that's one of the areas, like cardboard inserts, where I think it's potentially okay. It's a bit of a grey area that I would probably give a pass to, given the fact that if it was properly marked up or certainly a different colour to the originals, then yeah, I would overlook that. I would be okay with that.
I mean, a lot of this comes down to personal belief, I guess. It comes down to personal.
What about, we're talking to two, the foremost large size action figure collectors in the UK. What about things you can't see, like the elastic in Chewbacca and Vader?
I'll be the first to admit, I've got over 40 boxed 12-inch figures now, and the elastic on my boxed IG-88 is it's basically a rubber band. It's a green rubber band on all of them. And none of them exist anymore. All of them have completely decayed. And I still have the rubber band for mine, and it is just a bag of green dust now. Right? That's all it is. It's a bag of green dust. So I have sewing, basically nickel elastic, yeah? I buy what's of elastic. They're not the same as the originals, but the beauty of this is that it keeps it attached to the insert. Because one of the biggest problems with things like IG-88, Darth Vader, is if you have them loose in the box and not attached to the insert, they damage the screen. They damage the front of the screen, particularly IG-88. That's why you see so many of them with punctured windows, okay, punctured screens. A lot of mine that I inherently will have decayed elastic bands. Yes, absolutely. I've just replaced them with these with this elastic. My Lily Ledy boxed Jawa, the original, has a yellow elastic band in there. Okay, if you look at old photos of Jawa from the Amok Time Toys find and all that, even though they didn't find them, they like other people, and they bought the lot. This is back in the 90s. Mine didn't have the original elastic band, so I just put a yellow elastic band in there. It looks the part, and it keeps the figure attached to the inside, okay? I find that relatively minor and the least of our worries. A replacement elastic band to hold a figure onto the insert is the least of my worries. If I'm then faced with a reproduction weapons to IG-88, that's more of an issue to me. If I'm faced with a very good reproduction box, that's more of an issue to me. So if it comes through and it's shop stock and it's got all the original ties, that's great, that's awesome. But when it comes to elastic bands and things like that, they degrade, and I would sooner have it secure than have to rely on a rapidly decaying elastic band to keep the figure in.
I think this is a fascinating topic. I'm going to hit you with three. Okay, I'm going to go round. These are things I've struggled with, my own scruples. A quick yes or no from everybody. Okay. Replacement internal cog to fix your wing on an Imperial shuttle. Mark.
I don't have a problem with that.
I don't have a problem with that, and there's some precedence for that sort of thing in vintage robots.
Yeah, Stu?
Yeah, I think it's internal work. So
okay. Replacing rusty staples in a comic they're getting so bad they're staining the pages. Mark?
Yeah, I'm fine with that, mate. I won't tell anybody about that.
I'm not saying whether I've done these things or not. You'll notice. Lee?
I know people in the comic collecting thing, that's a big deal to them. So I would kind of defer to their better judgment. If it was my comic, I'd be reticent to do that.
Stuart?
I'm going to be honest with you, it's never something that would even come into my conscience that there's a problem.
Last one. You've got a beautiful mint Helix pencil, like it's been left out of the factory, but the nib's broken. Would you replace the nib with the nib from another pencil, Mark?
The nib?
Yeah.
What do you mean, the nib?
Well, the nib's everything. It's never been sharpened. It's got the factory end, but the point, the little bit of the end is snapped off.
You mean the lead?
The lead, yeah. It'd be very easy to just nick one from another pencil and just stick it in the top there.
Oh, Craig, man, you need to get out. You need to get out, mate. Honestly, lockdown has really got to you, hasn't it?
So that's a yes.
That's a yeah. I'm okay with that, mate.
See? Down with that?
I just wouldn't bother. You're not just see it anyway, you know.
Do you know what, Craig? If it's bothering you that much, mate, go ahead. I don't. I mean, it's one of those things, isn't it?
Hey, for a very small elitist part of the stationery collecting community, this is a big debate.
Well, that brings me on to resealing. Now, Peter Davis, now I'm coming to you here, Mark, would think your resealing in using modern glue was reproduction, and he would not have it, would not accept a reseal.
No. Listen, resealing, right, and there are grapes that will not discuss or even allow reseals to be mentioned or displayed within a grape. Now, I do not understand that, and it really does puzzle me why a reseal is not allowed. What are you meant to do with these figures that have got bubbles still attached to them? Are you meant to just display them without the figure? Is that how it works? Because to me, that is ridiculous. I have a almost complete Palatoy reseal collection, and believe you me, I have spent a fraction of what it would cost to put a mock run together. And once they are in a bit of GW acrylic, they look just as good. And I get just as much satisfaction out of looking at them as I would a mock. Probably more so because I've spent a fraction of the money, especially these days.
You know they're original.
They're all original. And people, I have this argument with some people on Facebook, you know, they say, well, how can you tell if they're, you know, a mock or not if you come to someone? Well, hang on a minute. If you are in the collecting game and you cannot tell if a figure has been resealed or not, you need to get another hobby, because 99.9% of reseals can be picked up almost straight away. When you know what you're looking for, it's very, very difficult to see a mock has been lifted once it's been taken off the card. It's very hard to hide that fact. There's normally tears in the litho, the bubble, the glue, and all the rest of it. You will be able to tell. And also, a lot of people just aren't really that bothered about hiding these things. I'm sorry, but I don't buy that 1 minute.
I think the thing is with reseals is they're not engineered to deceive. They're not engineered to look like mocks at all. They are what they are. They are open. They're the remains of opened cards from childhood collections. Them in themselves have some value. Them in themselves have some collecting value. They're original. They are part of the history of the toy line, and in a way there's a charm all to them themselves, that a kid tore this off a card, played with the figure, you know, and somehow the packaging survived. How amazing is that? That's brilliant. That in itself has a value all of its own, separate than something coming from the back room of an old toy store 30 years ago, you know?
And also, you don't have the stress of knowing if the bubble is going to last glued to a £4,000, £5,000, £6,000 figure over a period of time. You never have that worry. It's always coming off. So it doesn't matter.
And I'll tell you something, as somebody who's got half a run of Palatoy 12 backs and 20 backs mint sealed, that concern does play into your mind when you look at your stuff, you know. And in a way, I think like your collection, Mark, you actually get probably more enjoyment in that respect because the pressure's off. The pressure
is off, yeah, exactly.
I'm looking at a Death Star droid 20 back and I'm thinking, I love that thing, you know, that thing's ace. It reminds me of when my dad got me a 20 back Death Star droid in Rill when I was a kid, you know. It really reminds me of my father. And then the next thought I go into my mind is, I hope that bubble doesn't fall off. I'm storing that flat because I don't want that to unbond. And then it's like, that ruins it for me a little bit then, you know. You know, I think to myself, perhaps I should get a reseal.
The things we own start to own us.
Yes, don't they just? Don't they just? You have to be careful with that, I think.
I think we'll all agree. Reproduction bubbles and the recards, the reproduction cards are absolutely abomination. They are awful. One area where I do think reproduction is fine is some of the prop maintenance. Now, I've even seen people kind of saying, oh no, you should leave it as it is. But some of these rubbers that we use for costumes or masks or puppets, they perish. And I think just tidying them up regularly is acceptable. I'm sure you'll all agree with that, rather than lose the piece altogether.
Well, I think what you've got is different cultures. I mean, if you start looking at some of the really older collectible scenes like Tin Robots again and props and things like that, sympathetic restoration is accepted and it's considered to be conducive to preserving the piece. And I think there's an argument for that. I think there's a very good argument for that. I think one of the things I saw was an American firm who do restorations of antique toys, tin toys mostly. And the restoration work that they do on the boxes it's pure artisan. It's pure artisan work. It's absolutely incredible. You can't see how they've done this. And it's all archival. It's all, in theory, reversible. It's the same with posters. They do the same with that. And it's all to make them more displayable. Now, in the Star Wars community, and I'm playing devil's advocate here, in the Star Wars community, that would be completely intolerable. It'd be completely intolerable for that. But you go to props, you go to tin toys, it's more of a nuanced argument. From that perspective, I can understand where the confusion comes in. Can't believe I'm defending him, but where the confusion comes in, where people go, well, if restoration's acceptable in this hobby and it's acceptable here, why is it not acceptable here? It all comes down to cultures. That's how the culture in Star Wars collecting has grown. Different priorities have taken over. Perhaps as time goes on, perhaps as years go on, that culture might change. And sympathetic restoration might be more acceptable as these things degrade.
Well, that leads me on perfectly over to you, Craig. Now, many other vintage toy line areas embrace the use of reproduction parts. Action Man and Transformers are both renowned for using them. In fact, I went along to an Action Man event at the Palatoy factory a few years back, and there were just stacks of reproduction boxes and clothings on the stalls amongst the collectors. So a completely different kind of mindset. And these other toy lines are often known to mock and laugh at the Star Wars collectors for their views on the reproduction items, and are often called out to be elitist. And I think it was only in the last fortnight that there was a thread posted over on Star Wars Forum UK by Chris Dawson, who admins a general toy Facebook group, who said other admins had this exact view, and they've kind of taken the mick and laughing at the Star Wars community because of it, because I think there's reproduction in everything from Masters of the Universe, like we said, Transformers. I know they're often, 3D printing's become quite a big thing in Transformers to get small parts that are missing. So why is it that other toy lines embrace it, that they're as old as Star Wars as a brand, and are we elitist?
Are we elitist? It's a very good question. Star Wars collecting, it's a mature market, but it's not unique in that. I think there's a lot of money involved, perhaps more than other lines, other areas of collecting, but not exclusively. But I think there's something in the numbers. I think it's probably one of the most popular areas of vintage toy collecting, and that means statistically there will be more elitist Star Wars collectors than there will be elitist Action Man collectors, just by the sheer volume of the people involved. That's going to happen. In terms of what's right for one area of hobby is wrong for another, I think like all of us here, I dabble in other toy lines, and I said at the top of the show, I've recently been examining my blasters with magnifying glasses to check the molds and all the rest of it. And doing that with one eye looking at the Battlestar Galactica collectors, merrily printing out ships that never existed, like there's no tomorrow, and having a whale of a time.
Very true, mate. It's very true.
And you're kind of going, who's got it right? But I'm in my Star Wars bubble. I did pick the brains of Chris Malbon at Metropolis on this, because he's got years of experience in things that go back to pre-war tin play. And I do see it. I do see the evidence that it is more lax. And his view that while there are a lot of anti-repro zealots, these hardliners in the Star Wars community, it doesn't have the monopoly on them. There are hardline Action Man collectors and hardline Transformers collectors, just as there are in Star Wars. There's just not as many of them. And I think that every collecting community dating back to whatever people have collected, there'll always be this scale of people who are very, very passionate and take no prisoners and don't compromise at one end of the scale. And they tend to be people who've maybe been in the hobby longer, they're dealing higher end, they've got more money invested in it. And then at the other end of the scale, you've got people who are quite ambivalent towards it, who are just in it to have fun, and they're dabbling and they're playing. That's transferable. That's a situation that you can overlay in any hobby. I think what's changed in recent years is that all of these groups have got platforms that they never had before. They can find each other, they can amplify their voices. So this quote unquote elitist mentality can permeate and become something that we are tagged with, that we've got this reputation. And I think that's part of it. He said something else that I found really interesting, and I think it's worth just mentioning as we sort of draw this big conversation to a close. But he said it only takes one repro piece in a collection to cast doubt on the whole thing. So this is a guy who goes and buys collections. It's kind of what he does, often high end. And if he sees something in there, like I say, the red flags start to appear. And on both counts, really, if it's there knowingly, you'll kind of doubt the values of the collector that he's dealing with and start to suspect other things, the things he can't see, the internal workings of things. But if it's there unknowingly, he'll start to doubt the knowledge and the passion of the collector. So, one piece of repro to a seasoned dealer in everything from template, trains, right through to sort of the things that we're talking about there, sci-fi, TV, pop culture collectibles. The presence of repro is a very telling thing.
Yeah, I agree with that. Unfortunately, it does create a taint. Like you say, I mean, I think there's probably a spectrum of acceptance in all the areas of collecting, I suspect. It's like one of the things I've really been shocked by is I've dabbled in Transformers, Gen 1 Transformers, and going in as a novice, as just somebody who wants just a few nice original Gen 1 Transformers. Wow, it is a minefield with the reissues, the Chinese knockoffs, and it's put me off a little bit. It's made me a little bit reticent to go into this. And I go on the Transformers pages, and everyone seems to be okay to an extent with it. I think there's probably a spectrum. I suspect there are probably Transformers collectors who are probably a bit more exclusively Gen 1 and original Gen 1. So
undoubtedly,
I think let me just sort of put this to you, because I think it might be a psychological thing. If, say, I'd got a 12-inch Stormtrooper with a gun loose, and I'd got a 12-inch Stormtrooper with a gun in a repro box, and I was selling them on eBay, and they were both the same price, which one would you prefer to go for?
The loose one. It's about confidence.
If anything, the reproduction element is an instant red flag. It's a negative, and it would put you off.
And it's psychological. What they used to say about Jim Stevenson was he was reassuringly expensive.
Yeah, he was certainly that.
That's what they used to say about him. He was reassuringly expensive. You knew that if you went to Jim, right, and the three of us at least, I don't know if you knew him, Stuart. Did you know him?
I know of him. I've not had any personal dealings with him, no.
You went to Jim Stevenson to buy something, it was an event, and you knew you had to dig deep in your pockets, and you knew he wasn't going to budge on what it was, and any discount you asked for, you'd be made to feel like, well, I'm an amateur. He was elitist. But you knew confidence in what you were buying was absolutely kosher. You didn't have to doubt it. What you were buying was absolutely kosher. There would never be a single reproduction item on his stall.
So what I told you was true, from a certain point of view.
Well, boys, first of all, let's just have a general consensus on this, because are the anti-repro groups now kind of fighting a losing battle? In this modern day, it's getting easier and easier to be able to create these items. I mean, the introduction of the 3D printer a few years back, they're so cheap to buy now. Everyone's can make. Weapons in particular are going to be the easiest thing to produce. I mean, I've not got any experience of 3D printing, but you see it. But what I was amazed at, I listened to a few like general toy podcasts. The other day I was listening to one, and the two hosts were talking about designer toys. And I thought, what is that? And they went into it, and it's basically creating your own toy molds. And one of the hosts had bought the casting stuff off Amazon. He'd only spent about 30 quid and managed to cast an original toy, all the parts. On YouTube, I typed in, how to make a toy. And there is so many tutorials, and it is such a cheap thing to do now that anyone can do it. It's all there. It's how to do it on your screen, and you can do it for next to nothing. Obviously, when it comes to cutting the bits of excess off and painting it, that's a different story. You need to have some talent, but it's at the click of a finger now to how to do it. How do the groups go forward from here? Because it's just going to get worse. I mean, this stuff's here to stay. They're not getting rid of this.
The boutique art bootlegs are a different question than the mass-produced reproductions that are being done in the Far East. It's a different market. They're doing different types of things. Quite often, things like Sucklord and makers like that it's almost kind of a self-deprecating, ironic humour that they do it with. So it's not done straight. And there's a collecting base for that, but I tend to find that collecting base is very distinct from vintage collectors. There's some overlap, but largely it's quite distinct.
Craig, Mark, you probably have a bit of info. What are you spending on a 3D printer these days?
I'm not spending any money. All I can think about when I think about 3D printers is the
dildos.
That's going in.
Yeah, keep that in. Yeah. No, is the replicators on the Starship Enterprise? We're pretty much there, aren't we? We're almost there. You know, when you go up to the hole in the wall and it says "Make me this," and the machine will do it. So we're only like a few years away before we can go into a shop and they'll have like loads of these printers lined up on a wall, and you'll like tap in a code or whatever, and it will make whatever you want there and then. Yeah, it's fascinating to think where we're going to go. But in regards with toys, you know, I mean, like you say, Stu, it's here to stay. There's no denying it. There's no getting rid of it. There's no policing it. There's no other way other than to accept that repro is there. Some people will buy repro and some people will sell repro. And it goes back to what we were saying earlier about educating yourself. There's no excuse not to educate yourself if that's your motivation to collect vintage and keep it real.
Totally agree.
You can buy a 3D printer for the price of a hot toy.
Exactly. There you go.
But that doesn't buy you the skill and the talent to, you know, work the programs and create things. But I guess people download stuff, don't they? They just download the files and press print.
Yeah. Well, boys, so let's do a bit of conclusion. Let's go around each of you. Has your views changed at all? Do you think there is a little bit that the groups maybe could accept reproduction, or are you still of exactly the same opinion? Nothing's changed. Close those groups. The groups that are kicking them out are doing the right thing by sending Ned away. What are our final thoughts on it?
Well, my stance on reproduction hasn't changed. I'm leaving the debate with the same view that I joined the debate with, which is, you know, a lot of this is about tone. As repro debates go, and I know we haven't had a pro-repro person in here defending tooth and nail. You've been providing that, Stuart, with some balanced views. But I think I think it has been very balanced. I think a lot of wisdom has been spoken by us old veteran collectors. And I think all the talk about education, approaching this in the right way, that's where the conversation needs to go. I think there are a lot of incredibly clever, passionate, knowledgeable people in the hobby, and they are doing their utmost to educate people out there. And, you know, these are guys who are doing it, as we've discussed, you know, for the love, for the passion, because they believe in it. They're not making any money out of it. Imagine how that's going to have a step change when we all reach retirement age and we can just devote all our time to this. So I can see a day where we are going to stay one step ahead of the repros. That there will always be that drive to spot them. And, you know, there will be a time where we can place it on our smartphones and go, yeah, that's legit. That one's not. You know, I think we will work towards better resources so that people who do care about this can identify this stuff, and it will find a level.
Mark?
My opinion hasn't changed. I'm still anti-repro. I still don't agree with the motivations for creating it. I don't agree with a lot of the people that are creating it to make money off the backs of unsuspecting collectors, or suspecting collectors, I guess. But I am not dismissive of it. I understand that the very nature of our hobby, the money that is involved with some of these pieces, the nostalgia that a lot of people hold with Star Wars and vintage collecting, I understand that there is a market there. And I understand that people will always buy it. There will always be people out there willing to purchase something for a fraction of the price. It happens in all walks of life. I will not change my stance within the Facebook groups that I admin on. That is that we will not allow the sale of it, but we will also be prepared to engage with people who want to know more about it and where the best places to go are to educate themselves. And I think if we can all accept that as being the basis in which to deal with reproduction items, then I think we're probably on the right footing.
Lee?
My position on reproduction hasn't changed. I don't agree with it. I feel it is damaging to the hobby, and I feel as the reproductions become more and more accurate, the more and more damage there is done to the hobby, and I wish it was never made. Now, having said that, we cannot unmake these things. If the reproductions were to stop now, there would still be thousands of pieces out there, and we'd be still dealing with this for years to come. So my position is there has to be an effort to look ahead. And what we need to do much to the chagrin of many good people out there, we do need to open a dialogue with these people. Whatever their motivations, and I doubt their motivations as much as anyone else, we do need to open a dialogue with them. And that does mean we need to bring them in from the cold. Because if we do not, then what they do is going to remain completely unregulated and they will just do whatever they want on this. The way you've got to do this is you've got to give them a way out. You've got to give them some leeway to not be cornered. A great example of this is that whilst we may not like what he does, Chris Smith does mark the figures. That is something we need to say, we're happy about that. But there's more you can do. And if you want acceptance and you want to basically the wolves lay off you, then there's more you need to do. You need to be more responsible and think of the wider community, and not just those who watch Retroblasting, not just those who watch Toy Polloi, and not just those on their individual Facebook groups. That is the only way out of this, is damage limitation and management. And at the end of the day, if they do that, I'm not saying they're going to be accepted onto forums, and they certainly probably won't be accepted onto Echo, and frankly they wouldn't be accepted onto any forum that I manage, but it does mean that they take a more responsible role in what they're doing, because we can't uninvent this. Then they'll be left to do what it is they want to do. That is the only way out of this. We can't go back in time. As much as we want to, we can't go back in time and stop this from happening. We can't go and police every single reproduction that's out there and melt them down in some great pyre. We've got to do something which is positive for the community and will work. So we have to be pragmatic. And I think that means we've got to look very deep within ourselves from the anti-repro stance, as much as they've got to look deep within themselves from a repro stance.
Yeah, great points made by all three. I fall into your camps as well on this. Please don't think that I'm pro repro because of the questions tonight. I've just tried to offer the questions that were in Retroblasting's video. And I mean, before you judge Ned, walk a mile in his shoes. Because after that, who cares? He's a mile away from you and you've got his shoes. So, I mean, just leave Ned out of it. Okay, but boys, it's been a fascinating conversation.
Always with you what cannot be done. Do you nothing that I say?
Master, moving stones around is one thing. This is totally different.
No different. Only different in your mind. You must unlearn what you have learned.
All right, I'll give it a try.
No, try not. Do or do not. There is no try.
Been an interesting topic tonight, boys. Been great to discuss it and get your views. I think the points have all been very interestingly debated. Before we do go, of course, go and check out our social media, Instagram, Twitter and Facebook. Just search for Generation Skywalker. Of course, go over to www.generationskywalker.com where you'll find links to the blogs, to our enhanced shows, to all our shows. Over to YouTube where you can find all our shows enhanced, plus some unboxings and blast points. There's all sorts going on over there. Again, just search Generation Skywalker, and you can email us at generationsskywalker@gmail.com if you do want to bring up anything we've discussed on this show. Boys, thank you so much for your time. Lee, it's been great having you on. Real pleasure getting you on. Knew you'd be good for this topic. Thank you so much for joining us.
No problem, thank you.
So it is goodbye from Craig.
Cheerio.
Goodbye from Lee.
Cheerio.
Goodbye from Mark.
Good night.
And it is good night from me. We are Generation Skywalker.